For as long as she could remember, Megan had always dreamed of warmth, care, and attention. All this she lacked from early childhood. Megan's mom died of a heart attack when she was about 5 years old. The duration of the ward was forbidden to give birth at all due to health conditions. Doctors warned of the risks, but the woman still decided. The first years of her life, Megan was the most beloved child in the world. She vaguely remembered those times of warm hugs, mom's tender words, and kind smile. But of course, no matter how hard Megan tried, she couldn't remember the details. Mom's face was lost in a blur. And then Megan was left alone with her father, a somber and uncommunicative man. He faithfully fulfilled his parental duties, fed his daughter, bought her clothes, even checked her homework, but any heart-to-heart talk was out of the question. Her father asked only specific questions about her grades at school, her health, her plans for vacations. Sometimes he wondered if anyone was hurting his daughter. Megan couldn't remember if Dad had always been so uncommunicative or if he had been so changed by the death of the woman he loved. Megan had heard from neighbors that her father loved her mother very much. He had long sought the favor of the modest beauty, and then, when Elena married him, fulfilled every wish of his wife. It was hard for Megan to imagine her perpetually dissatisfied father as romantic, loving, attentive. As she grew older, the girl understood. The father blames his daughter for the death of his spouse, accidentally overhearing his conversation with a neighbor. The men were standing in the stairwell, and Megan was just returning from school. The anniversary of her mother's passing was approaching. I guess that's why the neighbors, longtime friends, were having this conversation. I told her to get an abortion, Dad said quietly. But she wouldn't have it. Let it be, she said. She had a premonition that everything would end well. Megan, hearing these words, froze under the stairs. She just couldn't get up right now, thus giving away her presence. Well, it's all good in the end, and it was good at first, Uncle Peter, the neighbor, pointed out. Megan knew her mom was friends with his wife and Aunt Gray. Megan was born. Adeline still had a whole 5 years to live afterward. That's so sad, Dad agreed, but her health was failing, and I could see she was getting worse. And those sleepless nights, I myself tried to get up to my daughter to adult her to sleep, but I could not be there all the time. And those assholes, they finished her after 5 years. That's for sure. Even the doctor confirmed it. Megan was having a hard time processing what she had heard. She hadn't discussed it with anyone. And who would she tell? Her father, as it turned out, considered her the culprit of all his misfortunes, so he probably didn't talk to his daughter much. Megan didn't have any grandmothers, or rather she had one, her dad's mom, but she lived far away in the country. They saw each other very rarely, and of course, warm, trusting relations between them did not arise. And girlfriends. What about girlfriends? You can't talk to them about such topics. They won't understand. They're just fine. Each of them has a mom, a dad. Not all of them do, but Mom is the main mom. There were so many tears. Her childhood teenage years were spilled into a pillow. Longing for a mother the girl hardly knew or remembered. Sadness over the cool and strained relationship with her father. Megan dreamed of growing up sooner, having a family of her own, having children. She had no doubt that sooner or later a man would appear in her life who would love and protect her. And Megan would be happiness for him, a source of energy and inspiration. The father probably still loved his daughter in his own way. He rooted, loved, cared for his daughter as best he could, worried about her future. It was her father who arranged for the girl to go to the University of Economics and Law, and even to the prestigious Faculty of Finance and Economics, connected some connections. And now his daughter, who would hardly have been admitted on general grounds, is a student of the best university in the city. No, Megan was not stupid or lazy. She had always done well in school, and she had always done her homework diligently. But it was just that to enter this faculty required a very outstanding ability. The girl didn't have them, so her father helped her. True, among the girl's classmates, as it soon turned out, outstanding abilities possessed few. So many then got into the university this way, either for money or by blat. Megan liked studying, and somehow warm, friendly relations with her classmates were formed at once. A wonderful student time began. Life had changed a lot. Megan felt that very soon she would become an adult and independent, which means that her dream of a loving family is very close. In the 4th year, fate dealt the girl another crushing blow. She was left all alone. Her father is frowning and not talking, but so reliable. In the shop where he worked, a milling machine operator, a gas cylinder failed, and a fire broke out. There were few casualties, but Megan's father was among them. Then left alone in the whole world, Megan realized that all this time felt the support and love of a loved one. Yes, her father had been that kind of man, unable to express his feelings, not saying much. But now Megan realized it, how much he did for her. About a year, the girl came to herself, got used to the new world without her father, and then John appeared in her life. John was a student at their school, but he was in a different department, law school. He, like Megan, was graduating that year. They met at a lecture in the auditorium, which was common for soon-to-be graduates. Young people were told about the very procedure of graduation, state exams and diploma, introduced young people to possible employers, presented companies that offered jobs to the best and most diligent students. It was interesting. Megan happened to be among strangers. Her friends were sitting at the other end of the hall, but Megan was a little late, and there was no seat next to them. So she had to sit where there were still empty chairs. At first, all the girls' attention was focused on the stage. She caught every word of the speakers, even wrote something down. "Bye, Bird." An unexpected question took the girl by surprise. She turned around and looked at the speaker. A handsome guy was looking at her with a smile. A wide smile, white teeth, correct facial features, and bright blue eyes. They immediately charmed Megan. There was so much interest in them. The girl suddenly felt that she cared about this man. "It's so depressing," he repeated. "And the weather outside is so beautiful. Spring is in full swing. There's a spring flower festival in the park. Why don't we run away?" It was the first time Megan had ever seen this guy. Besides, the lecture was very important and interesting. And after it, Megan and her friends agreed to go to the library to prepare together for the credit on economic theory. But all this somehow suddenly lost importance, and the girl nodded her head in agreement. The boy glowed, as if her answer made him the happiest man in the world. He confidently took Megan's hand and led her away from the classroom. Some people looked at the couple, but Megan didn't care at all. The weather did turn out to be wonderful. The sun was shining brightly from the clear sky, which was softly blue, and the freshness and purity of the greenery had just blossomed. The air was filled with the aromas of plants beginning to bloom. On the way, the young people got acquainted. It turned out that the guy's name was John. He admitted that as soon as he saw Megan, he couldn't take his eyes off her. "You're just incredibly beautiful," he said, looking at the girl. And she, strangely enough, did not feel a shadow of doubt, although always distinguished by modesty, and even stiff. I looked at you for a long time. I dared to talk to you because I was afraid you'd send me away. And when you agreed to go away with me, it was a weight off my shoulders." Megan was pleased to hear those words. She liked John more and more. What if a girl forbade herself to even dream of such a thing, so as not to be disappointed? What if he was the man she would later start a family with? Yes, these thoughts visited Megan at the first acquaintance. They started dating. John turned out to be a reliable, loving, sensitive man. Having learned the girl's story, it was as if he took her under his wing. He tried to help Megan with everything. The guy even helped her renovate her house. And more precisely, he did it himself, almost alone because the girl did not understand anything about it at all. A little more time passed. The young people graduated from university and both got a job. Megan became an accountant in a small firm for the installation of intercoms. John went as an assistant judge at the local courthouse. Megan knew by then that John was growing up without a father. His mother had given birth to him at a rather late age. As they say, for herself. She was a powerful woman who had spent her entire life in a senior position at the airport. Even now, at her advanced age, she didn't want to leave her position. John kept trying to introduce Megan to her, but for some reason, the girl was afraid of what if John's mother didn't like her. What then if this woman will be against the relationship of the only son with a girl of the lower strata of society? John laughed at these fears. Mom wasn't like that. Yes, she is used to command, but in everything that concerns me, she gives me freedom and autonomy. I've been on my own for 6 years. She's always worked hard, and I've been at home looking after the household. So don't worry, I'm not a mama's boy, and she's not a monster. Still, Megan persisted in making up excuses not to go visit John's mother. Worried, anxious, dreading the meeting. And then John proposed to Megan. It cannot be said that it was quite unexpected. Relationships of young people have long been strong. Both of them could not imagine life without each other. The girl had no doubt that John was the man she had dreamed of since childhood. He gave her everything that Megan lacked: love, attention, care, tenderness, or she could talk to him about anything. A soulmate. Sometimes Megan couldn't believe her luck. It might not have happened if she hadn't been in the chair next to John at the lecture that day. It was just such an accident of fate. John did everything beautifully, just like in the movies. He invited Megan to a restaurant to celebrate his small promotion. The girl had no idea of the true motives behind the date. Then suddenly musicians came up to them and played a beautiful melody. Megan, flapping her eyes in surprise, looked at the men in white tails. Then a waiter appeared with a gorgeous bouquet of roses. John took it from the hands of the young man and with a smile presented it to Megan, then deftly pulled out of his pocket a velvet box. "Be my wife." John smiled, looking into Megan's eyes. "You are the most beautiful girl in the world. I love you and I want to be with you always." The girl then even had tears flowing from her eyes, so much she was touched. This proposal, it was made so beautifully. John had carefully prepared for the meeting, so much thought. What was happening resembled a scene from a good, though not too original, melodrama. The young people began to prepare for the wedding. Both decided that they did not need a lavish celebration, just a party with friends from the university in a restaurant. And yet it was necessary to solve a lot of issues, to book a place in the registry office, to find a restaurant, to think over the menu. And, of course, now Megan had to meet John's mom. There was no point in delaying the meeting any longer. Megan remembered the day she'd first seen Martha. She'd been terribly nervous, but the woman who'd opened the door had seemed to be smiling at her genuinely. Tall, slender Martha looked very stylish in her elegant dress, with her hair slicked back smoothly. A real lady, and she behaved in a very friendly and polite manner. Megan realized at once that John's mother belonged to the so-called cold type of women. Careerist, used to work hard, compete, and achieve their goals. John is the same. He does not wait for heart-to-heart talks, warm embraces, no worldly advice. Martha's not going to be a second mom. And in the role of caring grandmother who spoils grandchildren with pies, it is also difficult to imagine her, but it's all nonsense. Martha caused Megan respect and even admiration. You bet, because she has achieved so much on her own and became a boss and a wonderful son raised. All this alone, without the help of her husband or relatives. After the wedding, began to live in Megan's apartment. Both worked. John received a good salary, enough even for some excesses, cafes and restaurants, beautiful clothes, concerts, and most importantly, to travel. For 2 years of marriage, Young managed to go to the sea 5 times. Not to luxury resorts with 5-star hotels, but still it was a wonderful vacation. Cheerful, carefree, full of sunshine and warmth, Megan and John together learned to lead a household. In principle, the young wife knew how to do everything. She had been living alone for a long time, but the head of the family had to learn new skills. Although John coped with it quickly and even as if playfully, Megan felt happier than ever. Next to her was a man who understood her half a word. John listened with interest to Megan's news, accumulated during the day, in all situations took her side, and he often hugged his young wife on and off. Megan realized that she had finally met the man she had long dreamed of and mentally thanked fate for this chance encounter. "I wish our Stephen would turn out to be so smart and responsible," what the young father dreamed, rocking his tiny son in his arms. Megan nodded her head. She had slightly different plans for this child. The young mother wanted Stephen to be happy and healthy, and the rest was not so important. You didn't have to be a factory manager at all to feel joyful and peaceful. Stephen did turn out to be an incredibly curious little boy. He was ahead of his peers in many ways. Early began to walk, early spoke. The baby constantly asked his parents questions, was interested in the world around him, trying to understand literally everything. The newly baptized parents did not want the soul in the firstborn. And when he was about 4 years old, John and Megan decided that it was time to give birth to Stephen's little sister. Megan hoped that she and John would have a daughter. She wanted to give this little girl everything she didn't have herself. Pretty dresses, smart hairstyles at the matinee, talking about girly topics, doing things together in the kitchen and all that. But Richard was born, a wonderful blue-eyed baby boy, charming, charismatic, attracting the attention of others. So what's for the daughter next time? John smiled, rocking the stroller. It was their first family outing of the city. Stephen was holding on to the handle of the stroller too. He was so looking forward to his brother, so excited to see him. True, when Richard was brought home from the hospital, he was a little disappointed. It turned out that Stephen had hoped that his brother would be older right away. He imagined a boy with whom he could play catch-up or hide and seek. Time flew by at breakneck speed. It turned out that coping with a couple of little boys at once is not so easy. And then, unexpectedly, Martha came to Megan's rescue. Every day after work, her mother-in-law would rush home, quickly change her clothes, have dinner, and then go straight to her daughter-in-law's house. John was often late in court, sometimes coming in late at night. Megan was exhausted by evening, and it was during this difficult period that Martha appeared. To take care of the grandchildren, she would go out with the little ones to walk in the yard. Sometimes they went further into the park. It was only 2, well, at most 3 hours a day. But how Megan looked forward to them each time. While the kids were away, she had time to clean up, cook something, go to the bathroom, and all in peace and quiet. It seemed like a small thing, but for a young, tired mother, it was a real salvation. How grateful Megan was to Martha. She repeatedly told her mother-in-law about it, and the latter smiled and replied that she herself was happy to communicate with her grandchildren. No, a warm and close relationship between daughter-in-law and mother-in-law had not developed, although Megan wanted it very much. She invited her mother-in-law to tea, tried to start frank conversations, but this woman, she was some too aloof, cold and inaccessible like the Snow Queen. It was either her personality or she didn't like Megan very much. Eventually, Megan stopped worrying about it and accepted the situation as it was. Martha stayed away from her daughter-in-law with advice, reproaches, and moralizing. She showed up when Megan needed her and helped the young mother a lot. Perhaps the woman herself did not even realize how she supported Megan in a difficult period. A little more time passed, the boys grew up. Now both went to the garden, and Megan was finally able to go to work. There was more money in the family. The couple began planning a summer trip to the sea. It was to be their children's first. And then life in the country began to change. Enterprises were closing one after another. That fate befell the firm where Megan worked. The woman was out of work. John's salary began to be delayed steadily, which, by the way, at the new price level was not enough even for the most basic necessities. John was now practically never home at all. After a working day in court, he ran around the city looking for a part-time job. Somewhere to guard a warehouse, somewhere to help unload a truck. The man grabbed every opportunity to bring home an extra. Megan was a housewife now. She was looking for a job in her specialty. She ran to interviews, advertised in newspapers, but there was no result. In the end, the woman couldn't even get a job as a salesman. There was no demand for jobs in their town at that time. Megan was glad that she was able to at least find a job as a cleaner. Now she scrubbed the floors in the entryways of a neighboring house in the early morning while everyone was still asleep. It didn't pay much, but there was a plus side to the job. It ended late in the morning. The whole day was free. Money was scarce. The children were growing at a dizzying rate, and clothes were quickly becoming too small for them. They also needed nutritious meals. This John and Megan could sit on buckwheat or pasta, and the boys need vitamins, meat, fruit, milk. Young spouses were often close to despair. It was Martha who kept them from being completely lost. She was cut down long ago, as she should have been on a well-deserved vacation by age. And just someone needed a warm place, which for a long time was occupied by a firm and principled boss. But Martha managed to save a certain amount of money during the years of work at a fairly high post. She dreamed of buying a small house by the sea where she expected to meet her old age. But circumstances have changed and prices have risen. Now the woman's savings would not be enough for a decent home, and she was not going to buy anything. So Martha used her savings to sponsor the young family every month. Both John and Megan knew if anything happened, they wouldn't be lost. Martha wouldn't let them go under. But at the same time, they both didn't want to abuse the woman's help, so they did their best. It was hard, and yet the feeling of a strong rear end kept them from being discouraged. In spite of everything that was happening, Martha was still unknown to Megan. Her mother-in-law kept her distance from her daughter-in-law, and she didn't hug her son either. But grandchildren are a different matter. Next to them, the woman blossomed. She embraced them without shyness, kissed them, called them affectionate nicknames, and the boys reciprocated. Megan sometimes tried to talk to her husband about it. "Don't worry about it. Mom was always like that." He smiled. "Just a person like that, kind, good, loving. But she does not know how to show her feelings. Maybe it's because Mom grew up in an orphanage. I didn't get love when she was a kid. So she doesn't know how to express her feelings, but she's reliable and she doesn't abandon her own." When John and Megan's sons went to school, Martha took over the lessons. It turned out that she once, many years ago, wanted to become an elementary school teacher. Then the woman's career took a different path, but now the long-time dream was realized in her grandchildren. Grandmother was inspired by the boys. She knew how to be strict and demanding, but at the same time she emphasized to interest Stephen and Richard, to instill in them a thirst for knowledge, to develop the innate abilities of her grandchildren. While parents tried to get an extra penny and disappeared on earnings, their children did not run homeless in the yard. They were under the reliable supervision of their grandmother, who invested a lot in their development. Stephen and Richard were the best students in their classes. They were also good at sports, because Martha had time to take them to the volleyball section located on the other side of the city. In this sports center, the best coach worked, and Martha did not agree to anything less for her grandchildren. And so they lived, stretched, supported each other, raised their children. And then one day John got tired of working, as the man himself put it, miserable existence. He decided to risk opening his own business. It is clear that the man took the money for the promotion of the business from his mother. And where else? Not by taking out loans from the bank at crazy interest rates. Then the newlyweds had their first son, Stephen. The name was chosen by John, the name of his neighbor, who paid a lot of attention to the boy and became for him a kind of a substitute for his grandfather. He was a respected man, serious, intelligent. He headed a whole local factory for a long time. John bought some technical stuff from a warehouse in a neighboring town, sold it on the market at a higher price, and immediately made a profit, albeit a small one. The success inspired John, so he decided to work in this direction and registered as a sole proprietorship. Megan helped him with the documents. She was an economist, worked as an accountant for a long time, so reporting and primary documentation were completely on her. The couple rented a place in the market and began work. At first, the business was slow. The client base had not yet been built up. Links with suppliers had not been established. Profits in the first few months were either minimal or non-existent. I had to solve many different problems. Sometimes I even wanted to give up, but in the end, the business went on, and the small store and money. Finally, the family had money, albeit small, but their own. They didn't have to ask Martha for help anymore. John even managed to pay her back the money he had borrowed for the business. Megan knew that her mother-in-law tried to refuse to give this help as a gift to the young family. But John insisted. They flew to the sea after all. The boys were already old enough. Megan watched with what joy they were running along the beach, and her heart sank with delight. What happiness this was. More on that next. John's business grew. Soon the man opened an entire store, then another. Now he had a whole staff working for him, accountants, managers, salespeople. But Megan was given the opportunity not to work and to deal with the house and children. True, the boys had already become teenagers and no longer needed a nanny. But the family moved to a private house, and Megan had a whole garden at her disposal. For its improvement, the woman took up with energy and inspiration. And again she thanked fate for what is happening in her life. The house is a full cup, a loving husband, wonderful, talented children. Every day a reason for joy and pride. And a garden in which Megan felt like a full mistress. Here she felt calm, relaxed, peaceful. The woman believed that her present life was a reward for what she had experienced as a child. She also often regretted that her father did not see how wonderful life was for his daughter. He probably would have been happy for Megan, and he certainly would have cherished his grandchildren. And yet, as time went on, Megan began to realize that something was missing. John had grown distant. No, they still had a wonderful relationship. Her husband was never rude to her, always remembered holidays and their personal dates. Only he was too busy working. He came home late at night, often flew on business trips, literally lived his life. Stephen and Richard are almost adults now. They have their own lives, their own friends, their own interests, and that's fine. It was just a little sad that their sons had grown up so quickly and Megan hadn't had time to fully enjoy their childhood years, too busy trying to survive. Martha remained alien and cold. Such a temperament. Megan probably didn't even know until now how or what to talk to her about. Their only topic of conversation was probably Richard and Stephen. Her mother-in-law had grown old, but she still looked like an iron lady. She lived separately, and she refused to move out of her own apartment, where she was the full mistress, into her son's house. And Megan understood and supported her in this. And in this difficult period in Megan's life, again not happiness. She didn't even believe her feelings at first. She thought she just didn't even seem to allow the thought to be true. But then it became all too obvious. Megan realized she was expecting a baby again after all these years. John seemed overjoyed, but still took the news a little too reservedly. There wasn't the excitement in his eyes that there had been years ago when he had learned of his wife's first and second pregnancies. Wow, so unexpected, he smiled, then pulled Megan close and kissed her. We need to find you the best doctors. We're getting older, you know. Megan understood and was worried too, of course. Being pregnant in your early 20s was very different from being pregnant with a woman in her 40s. There are definitely more risks. The sons took the news of the imminent arrival of a brother or sister positively. Wow, we're going to have a little one. Stephen smiled. It's so weird, but I like the news. It's fun, Richard shook his head. Martha, hearing the news, only shrugged her shoulders. Well, it's unexpected, of course, but it's nothing special. I had John when I was a little younger than you. Everything's going to be all right now. The pregnancy, despite Megan's misgivings, went easily, but as an older woman, she had to undergo more frequent checkups. At the next ultrasound, Megan lay on the cold couch and prayed to herself that the baby would be okay. She, of course, dreamed of a daughter and a long time ago, since childhood. After the birth of her two sons, the wish had been forgotten. And now, when she found out that she was pregnant again, Megan began to hope again, how she wanted to become a mom of a charming girl. The woman chased these thoughts away from herself, convinced that one should be happy with any child. And it was unlikely that after two boys, suddenly such a miracle would happen. Why would it be a girl? Now, lying on the couch, Megan wanted only one thing, that with this child that lives under her heart, everything turned out to be all right. Whether it's a boy or a girl is a matter of 10. Being pregnant with her first sons, Megan didn't know much. Now she had a wealth of information that made her heart clench anxiously and her eyes gaze into the face of the doctor, inserting a sensor across her abdomen to read her emotions. Storina kept thinking the doctor was frowning. How scared she was. Was it really that bad in there? Do you have a girl? Suddenly the man in the white coat said in a calm, mundane tone. A hot wave of joy flooded Megan's heart. She even felt a little dizzy. She hadn't expected to be told the gender so early. And then there was a girl. Was this really happening to her? Had her dream come true after all these years? Is she all right? Megan asked Megan the question she wanted to know. She's fine. No abnormalities. Vivian was born on her due date. Megan had thought of a name for her daughter a long time ago. Back in college, I think. The girl was born a healthy baby and soon became the family's favorite. Martha now came to Megan's house every day to babysit her granddaughter. Once again, her help came in handy. Megan adored her daughter because she had waited so long for her. She had stopped dreaming of such a gift, but sometimes she needed time to take a bath or go shopping alone. And then Martha came to the rescue again. Her time flew by at breakneck speed. Megan knew it was always like that when you have a small child. He's just a helpless little baby. Before you know it, it's already a person with its own personality and hobbies. Vivian turned out to be a pretty little girl. She took after Megan, was the same swarthy, slender, and graceful, but her eyes were her father's huge, bright blue. They shone on her swarthy, beautiful face. The boys had all grown up. Stephen graduated first. He easily got into the Boston Medical Academy. Stephen must have decided in the 5th grade that he was going to be a doctor. At first, his parents thought it was a frivolous hobby. But as time went on, the eldest son stayed true to his dream. In the end, he entered the medical school, and on the budget. Megan at first was afraid to let the young guy alone in the big city. But Stephen, he was serious enough and independent for such a university. So in the end, his mother had to respectfully accept his decision. A few years later, Richard followed his brother. He, too, entered Boston University, only he chose a different specialty. From childhood, he was attracted to computers, programs, technical puzzles. The sons flew out of the nest. The husband lived a life of work. During this period, Megan realized what a happiness it is that she has a daughter small, beautiful, loved, and loving. She filled women's lives with joy and happiness, made it bright and meaningful. If it weren't for Vivian, Megan would feel all alone and unneeded now. Vivian practiced ballet and the girl was doing great. The choreographers were all saying she had real talent. Megan knew that her daughter went in her, except that in childhood Megan did not have such an opportunity to show her gift. Her father, of course, did not take her daughter to a club, but Vivian had succeeded. The girl even traveled with performances in different cities. A real tour, loving, caring mother everywhere accompanied her. It was a bright and saturated life, which gave Megan a daughter. Everything was good, just wonderful. The boys studied and worked in Boston. Megan visited them occasionally. The sons were happy, and that made them happy. John was developing a business that was bringing in more and more profit. Now Karina had a daughter, whose long-standing dream was finally realized. It would seem, live and rejoice. But the woman's heart was increasingly clenched from some vague premonitions. Something was wrong. Megan chased away bad thoughts. She was even going to see a psychologist, but one day, the cause of the vague anxiety revealed itself. Megan had gone to the mall to find a dress for her daughter's next performance. Vivian had caught a cold somewhere in the garden, so Martha stayed with her. Megan went to the mall. The woman was in high spirits. She had managed to find a wonderful outfit for her daughter, and it was just the right size. She imagined how excited her little girl's eyes would be when she saw the outfit. That's when the woman noticed John. She just happened to glance down, going up the escalator, and saw her husband on the first floor in a bright orange shirt, which she herself had given him. It was a stylish shirt with short sleeves, summer, dressy, and elegant at the same time. John liked it immediately, and now he often wore it to work. John wasn't walking alone, but with a young girl in his arms. From afar, Megan couldn't see all the details, couldn't see the stranger's face, didn't have time to estimate her age. But she noticed the main thing. John's hand was resting on the thin waist of the young woman. She, in turn, had her palm in the back pocket of John's pants. John was smiling happily. The world turned upside down in just a few moments. Megan stood on the escalator steps. She considered herself a happy, accomplished woman who had managed to build a strong family. And on the next floor, she arrived already a cheated and betrayed spouse. To gather her thoughts, Megan went up to the food court, settled down at a small table in the far corner of the hall, and ordered herself a coffee. What she had just witnessed, how to explain it? Megan really wanted to find some excuse for what she had seen, but it wasn't working. If she wanted to, she could still convince herself that John was just walking through the mall with a female employee. Maybe they wanted to look at the assortment of competitors or something else. John had his arm around the stranger's waist. Both of them were not embarrassed by the people, who at this time in the mall were plenty. They walked with their arms around each other and smiled as if they were well-off free students. And between them there was clearly a special relationship. It was immediately apparent. Is John cheating on her? It's hard to believe. Almost impossible. But why impossible? Megan began to reflect on her life and realized that she and John had long lived as close relatives, but not as loving spouses. All their conversations revolved around their children and their future. When was the last time they had gone out together? Besides, John was away at work too often, flying on business trips. Maybe it wasn't business trips at all, but traveling with young mistresses. Megan found it hard to breathe, as if she'd been hit in the solar plexus. She couldn't get enough air. Everything was spinning in front of her eyes. Was her happy married life just an illusion? How stupid did she have to be not to see it? Megan decided not to get too excited. She pulled herself together and got up from the table. She'd have to go home and act like nothing had happened. When John returned, she would discreetly take his cell phone and look into his correspondence. Then everything will be clear, and we can do something about it. You need proof. Otherwise, you can fantasize a lot of things. Maybe it's not so bad after all. That night, Megan put her plan into action. She'd always trusted her husband. It had never occurred to her to go through his phone before, and John knew it because his cell phone didn't even have a password. The man had left the phone on the coffee table when he went to the bathroom. He generally assumed that his spouse was already asleep. Megan was awake. As soon as the sound of water came from the bathroom, she slipped out of bed and went downstairs. She grabbed her husband's cell phone, entered his messages, and there was a lot of interesting things. Megan learned that her husband's lover's name was Catherine. She was only 25 years old, not much older than Stephen. Deceived spouse leafed through numerous photos of a young girl. On them, she showed the advantages of her luxurious figure. Young, incredibly beautiful, daring Catherine was not shy and wrote such things, which rather even think was embarrassing, but John clearly liked it. Apparently, the couple had already had quite a long affair. John was firmly on the hook for the young beauty. They called each other cute nicknames, made plans for a summer vacation. Apparently, the lovers had not the first time traveled together to the sea. It hurt to read this correspondence, but she needed to know what was going on. What she saw shocked her. She did not want to believe that all this was true. The correspondence was also about Megan. Catherine called her lover's wife an old lady. John did not even try to defend his wife. On the contrary, sent in response smiling smiley faces saying it's funny to him. How could this happen to them? They were once the closest and dearest people to each other, two halves of one whole. They had overcome so much together, and suddenly this happened. The sound of the water in the bathroom faded, and Megan hurriedly returned the phone to its place and rushed into the kitchen. Let John think she'd gotten a drink of water. For now, she didn't want to show her husband that she was aware of this ugly affair on the side. She didn't want to, or she just couldn't. She needed to digest the news, figure out how to proceed, realize after all what she really wants, and get used to the idea that John is not a reliable wall, behind which so cozy to hide from the hardships of life and the usual traitor. Outwardly, nothing has changed in the life of the family, but now Megan became more attentive. John's delays at work and his constant business trips were perceived quite differently. From time to time, while John was in the bathroom or out without his phone at the neighbors, Megan would look at his phone. Catherine texted John often. Some of the messages were quite explicit. They were usually accompanied by pictures of the girl. To give Catherine credit, she looked great. Judging by the state of her body, the girl spent long hours in the gym. From the correspondence, Megan realized that Catherine does not work and does not study. A typical kept woman. John was apparently willing to pay for it all. No, Megan knew that men just over 40 often pay attention to young nymphs. They probably feel younger, more energetic, stronger than their peers. And what is there to hide? 25-year-old friends are generally much more attractive than 40-year-olds, but the woman thought that her family would not be affected by this. She remembered the way John had looked at her, what he had said to her. He had genuinely loved Megan. Once upon a time, she had never doubted that. Could such feelings also grow cold with time? Catherine was no longer just a lover or a girl for occasional entertainment, who could be dumped at any time, swapped for another. John and his young lady's relationship was about 5 years old. Sometimes historical dates were glimpsed in their correspondence, and the oldest ones were around the time Vivian was born. Apparently, that was when they had met. Megan remembered that period of time after giving birth and with a newborn baby in her arms. She didn't feel very well. She probably looked even worse. Megan was completely focused on her health. She didn't even have the energy for her sons at the time. Thankfully, by the time they were born, her sisters had long since managed to become fully independent young men. Of course, Megan paid almost no attention to her husband because, as it seemed to her, there was no need. A grown man passionate about his work. But maybe that was where the mistake lay. Maybe she herself was to blame for what was happening to their family now. Megan shook her head and chased away the wrong thoughts. What was her fault? It was John, after all, who had decided to look for fun aside. No would have supported his wife in her time of need, to take on some of the responsibilities, to take care of his spouse and newly born daughter. No, John chose another option. Catherine may not be his first mistress. John had been estranged for a long time, after all. Megan realized that clearly now. It's just that the woman preferred not to notice such trifles as distant alarm bells. He earns money, does everything for the family, does not drink, does not beat, does not humiliate. In money does not limit. Well and wonderful. What else is there to complain about? Megan wasn't complaining. She lived and enjoyed a happy, as it seemed to her, family life. And then suddenly it hit her. Maybe Catherine was not John's first mistress, but that it was with her he had a serious enough relationship, Megan did not doubt. John was truly in love with the girl. It could be felt in the tone of his messages. What only affectionate words he did not call his mistress. The man protected his lady from domestic, financial, and any other problems, gave her gifts, was constantly interested in her desire. It pained Megan to read this. Perhaps he had never behaved like that with her, even in the golden years of their marriage. It was understandable then. They were spinning, surviving, pulling children not to sentimentality. Megan realized that Catherine was getting on John's nerves about the divorce. "Well, and when you already divorced your old lady?" wrote the girl, supplying the message with red from anger emoticons. "All in due time, baby," answered John. "I'd like more details. I'm in the process. A lot of things need to be prepared so that we can live not only happily but also richly. My princess loves a beautiful life." John's usually reserved and serious demeanor made Megan almost nauseous, but she continued to read the messages, looking for information about the upcoming divorce. She was more interested in this issue than any other, because it directly affected her and the children. Megan wasn't particularly worried about how her sons would take the divorce. They were adults and both of them had been living on their own for a long time. For them, most likely little will change. But the daughter, she is accustomed to this house and adores her father. Despite his indifference, the little girl would be very worried. Megan had no doubt about that, and something would have to be done about it. John's messages sometimes slipped in that he was taking his time with the divorce to properly prepare for leaving. What would that mean? The spouse was clearly up to something, and Megan wanted to find out what it was about. As far as her relationship with her spouse was concerned, nothing much had changed since Megan had found out about Catherine. Faking ignorance was easy. Megan and John hadn't spoken in a long time. Hey, how are you? How are the kids? That's all they talked about. And that's the life they've had for a long time. How come Megan didn't realize this before? I guess she was too busy with her daughter and her own worries and plans. She didn't tell Martha the details of her son's life, of course. She still came over sometimes to play with her granddaughter. There were times that Megan took Vivian to her grandmother to go on business. But the relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law never became warm and frank. Over the years, Megan had trusted Martha completely in everything about the baby. Perhaps it was the only person with whom the woman could leave her daughter with a light heart. But otherwise, over the years, Martha and Megan had remained largely strangers to each other. No, of course, Megan couldn't tell Martha about John, though she wanted to share it with someone. Why worry the older woman? Of course, she'd be upset to hear about her son's behavior. Will be worried it will negatively affect her health. Of course, the mother-in-law will still find out about the divorce, which of course she will. Even if John did not plan this procedure, Megan herself would have organized it, because cannot live with a traitor. That's how she perceived her husband now. If you're in love with someone else, say so. Why lie, why hide, why scheme? John never once scolded Catherine when she insulted Megan in her messages. And the old woman had called her both fat and stupid. John had at best ignored those unflattering remarks, at worst responded with laughing emoticons. It was hurtful. But Megan was much more interested in her husband's vague promises to divorce her as soon as everything was financially settled. The spouse was preparing something, some kind of scam, the results of which Megan was to be left with nothing. The man didn't write about it directly. It is understandable correspondence with his mistress had a completely different character, was light, humorous, in some places hot. But from some of the words and hints, Megan knew John was up to something. But how would she know what surprise to expect? Surely John and his mistress would discuss the details of the plan when they met. Megan, understandably, felt the whole situation hard. The pain of betrayal of a loved one, a vague future suspended state, all this frightened her, and there was no one to share it with. Had her mother been alive, how much easier would this trouble have been to bear? Megan slept badly, became nervous, pale and thin, irritable and withdrawn. Her physical condition even worsened, with headaches. One morning, as Megan was feeding her daughter breakfast, her mother-in-law called. "Are you home now?" Martha asked. "Yes," Megan answered. "John's at work, but my daughter and I are home." "Great, I'll be right there." Megan was overjoyed. "That's great. That means the mother-in-law can take care of her granddaughter. Meanwhile, she's going to go to the doctor. She's been having a lot of headaches. Have them prescribe some pills. I can't stand it anymore." Martha showed up as usual with a present for her granddaughter. A beautiful doll in a big pink box. The girl threw herself on her grandmother's neck. No, not because of the toy, of course, but there was just a special bond between Martha and Vivian. The grandmother and granddaughter seemed to understand each other without words. Megan had seen something like that before with her sons. Martha was a wonderful grandmother to all her children, sensitive, caring, attentive. It was surprising, considering her bossy, somewhat cold nature. Surprising, but wonderful. It's so nice to know that your children are so loved by someone other than you. Good morning. Megan smiled at her mother-in-law. It's so good to have you here. Vivian missed you. I actually came to see you today. The smile that had been directed at her granddaughter slid off the older woman's face. She stared at her daughter-in-law. Megan immediately tensed, sensing that this was going to be a serious matter. Go in the living room and watch cartoons. Okay? Megan turned to her daughter. She nodded her head and obediently slipped out of the room. She promised her mother and grandmother that they would join her soon to play with the new dolls. Martha and Megan were left alone in the kitchen. What was that about? What did you want to talk to me about? Megan asked. Martha didn't answer right away. It was obvious that she was having a hard time starting a conversation. Her mother-in-law sat down on a chair behind the counter that divides the kitchen into two parts. Megan sat across from her. Do you know that John has been the only person near and dear to me for a long time? Martha said at last. Until the grandchildren came along and you. Megan nodded. Of course she knew that. Martha had been pulling her son along on her own, working all her life, making sure the child had everything she needed, and yet not basking in gold, but really raising John, always making time for him. When her husband talked about his childhood, Megan sometimes wondered where Martha, working at such a responsible high position, took the strength to do so much with the child. She went hiking with him, and took him to museums, circuses, theaters, and every evening read books to him, and checked his lessons, and taught him everything around the house from cleaning and cooking to fixing the faucet. It's a tremendous amount of work. Megan realized this fully when she became a mother herself. I tried to raise John to be a good person. Not only smart and successful, but also reliable and decent, not like his father. For a long time I thought I had succeeded, but the genes seemed to have taken their toll. Martha looked so sad at this point that Megan wanted to hug her, but the gesture wouldn't have been natural for them, so the woman held back. I never told about John's father, not even to him. He asked, of course, especially when he was a teenager. I explained to him then that I really wanted a child. Age was pushing it, too. I didn't see any candidates for the role of father of the future baby around me. That's why I went to the resort that summer, to give myself a long-awaited gift. I lied to John then that I specifically made a resort romance there in order to give birth for myself. He wasn't the only one who thought so by the way I'd announced to everyone that my pregnancy was a conscious move, but it wasn't. Megan was silently catching every word. That frankness. Martha, it had never been so open. Martha was about 35 at the time, by today's standards a very young woman with everything ahead of her. Back then she was considered an old maid. All deadlines for becoming a mother and wife had been missed. The train had left. Martha was not particularly worried about it. She devoted herself fully to her work. She had a responsible position, and there was always a lot to do. The woman liked to realize that she was such an important, indispensable person at the airport. She was respected, listened to, and even feared. Sometimes she regretted that she had not had a child and probably would not have one. But Martha didn't worry about that. She herself had grown up in an orphanage. She had seen so many unhappy fates and was not 100% sure that she could be a good mother and make her baby happy. That summer she was sent on a trip to the sea from the airport. Martha could afford to buy the tickets herself, but the union honored her as Employee of the Year. It's nice to be recognized and appreciated. The sanatorium turned out to be just wonderful. Comfortable room, sea in 5 minutes walk, wonderful dining room in walking distance. And there, in this sanatorium, Martha met her future father, John. It was a so-called business trip. A young guy about 10 years younger than Martha. He came from some northern town to work. It was Alex's first time at sea, and at first he looked a little dazed. It was even cute when Martha first noticed him in the dining room. The young man caught her eye immediately. He was good, really good, hair the color of ripe wheat, bright blue eyes. Those eyes would eventually play a key role in Martha's fate. He had amazing eyes, and I guess they were the reason I fell in love with him like a girl. I don't think I'd ever experienced anything like that even in my youth. Bottomless, bright blue, attentive. John inherited them. Richard and Stephen too, by the way. Alex had no idea he had a son and grandchildren, and that they had his eyes. Martha was now looking everywhere with her eyes for the handsome boy. At first she didn't understand why she did it, but he was a young man, so he was sure he would soon have no shortage of admirers like himself, young, lovely creatures. And so it was. For several days Martha watched from afar as Alex returned to the sanatorium with one and another beauty. All of them were just like a selection, slim, tanned, smiling. Alex smiled a lot himself. He had a wonderful smile. From it the guy had charming dimples on his cheeks. One day the young handsome man himself approached Martha. Alex confessed to me that he had been watching me for a long time. He's incredibly attracted to me. It was unexpected to hear that. A young, handsome guy, whom I had been admiring from afar for about a week, was giving me compliments that made my head spin. I was desperately jealous of all those young beauties with whom he appeared in the sanatorium. And he, it turns out, at the same time dreamed of me and did not dare to approach, did not dare, because he was afraid of rejection. According to him, I looked beautiful and inaccessible. Martha began a stormy resort romance. They walked a lot in the neighborhood, swam at night in the sea, laughed. Martha felt 10 to 15 years younger next to him. It seemed she had never laughed so much even in her youth. It's been a wonderful week. I fell in love. I just lost my head, which doesn't usually happen to me. It was so unlike me. Alex had me under a spell, and I didn't notice a lot of things, a lot of obvious things. Martha always paid for her companion in cafes, at the canteen, on excursions. He never gave her anything, she never expected it. Being around this guy was a gift in itself. Then one day Martha woke up in her room, expecting to see Alex next to her. They'd taken a long walk along the night promenade, gazing at the stars, talking about everything, and had fallen asleep with their arms around each other in the morning. Martha felt so happy and peaceful in the arms of her lover. But when she woke up, she didn't see Alex beside her. Martha stretched and rolled over onto her other side. She was still not alert for anything. This had happened before. Alex had probably just gone out for coffee and pastries to surprise her. How nice it was to have someone care for you like that. Martha dozed for another half an hour, enjoying the peace and quiet. But the longer she was alone, the more she realized something was wrong. Finally, the woman, unable to bear the anxiety any longer, got up, and then everything became clear. Alex's belongings were gone, not his clothes, not his favorite wristwatch. He'd even remembered to bring a little thing like perfume and a toothbrush. So Alex left while Martha was asleep. He left quietly, so as not to wake the woman and explain himself to her. Why was everything fine yesterday? A wave of longing and despair and resentment swept into Martha. It became difficult to breathe. She wandered around the room and could not find a place to go. Her heart clenched with unbearable pain. Martha thought she had found her soulmate. Alex had been so easy for her, so pleasant. Even though he was much younger, Martha felt supported by him. Nothing had foreshadowed this outcome. Just last night Alex had hugged her tightly, showering her with kisses and compliments. He was seriously planning a future together. The guy lived in a small town in the north. He even called Martha to go there, and she was ready to give up her career, apartment, friends, everything, just to be near him. In desperation, Martha opened her closets again and again. Maybe Alex had just moved his things? What about himself? Maybe he was late for some reason. But Alex's clothes were nowhere to be found. Martha noticed some of her own things were missing. A box of gold jewelry. Martha had taken a small part of her tame jewelry on vacation, but they were her favorite 2 pairs of earrings, a dainty chain, and a bracelet with small sapphires. Original, exquisite pieces that you couldn't buy in every store. Martha's bracelet was imported from Germany. Now this jewelry box has disappeared. There was no half-empty bottle of Chanel No. 5 on the shelf in the bathroom. In the safe closet, the woman was missing 3-year-old dresses, which she bought when she was on vacation in Riga. Her heart clenched with a bad feeling. So is Alex just a criminal? I should probably write a report to the police. On the other hand, it was shameful to have to confess to strangers that she had lost her head in the arms of a young traitor and trusted him blindly. And a grown woman boss. Even Martha sat down on the sofa, hugged herself tightly, and began to sway. That's what she used to do when she was just a little girl. Martha had grown up in an orphanage. There you couldn't get comfort and sympathy from adults. So the girl got into the habit of hugging herself when she became an adult. Martha somehow outgrew this ritual, and in a moment of stress and despair, the habit returned. It was necessary to leave the stuffy room and take a walk along the shore. The fresh sea breeze would give strength and bring relief. Martha walked to the front door and noticed a note. Alex had left her some kind of message on the mirror. The heart glad for 3 fed a faint hope that everything would still be fine. Maybe the young man is just preparing some kind of surprise. And here she almost went crazy with worry. But the miracle didn't happen. Alex did run away. Only for some reason it was important for him to explain his behavior to Marta. You've probably figured it out by now. Are you crying? You look at me, scolding yourself for being so gullible. I don't know why I'm writing all this. Usually I just leave. But you're really special. I can't do what I do to others. I really like you. You're strong and noble. You're also really beautiful. Probably any man would be happy with you, but not me. I realized a long time ago that my happiness is different from the idea of a prosperous life of most people. I like adventure, a change of location, meeting new people. I realized long ago that I can never be with one single woman. Family, children. Everyday life is not for me. That's the way I was born. My mother says I took after my father. I never knew him, by the way. He's also a vagabond, an adventurer. Probably this man does not even know of my existence. It doesn't matter. Of course, I haven't told you a word of the truth. Well, almost know the fact that you are very beautiful, smart, strong. I really think so. Those words of mine were sincere. As for my biography, I named the wrong city. I lied about my age. My name isn't even Alex. That's my favorite part of making up a cover story, pretending to be someone else. Some people think of me as a young actor, some as a talented young engineer. It all depends on the inspiration. Sometimes it comes to me and I compose a story about a tragic fate. It is fascinating, interesting, exciting. And women like it. I know how to make them happy, even if only for a short time. Those burning eyes of yours, those admiring glances. I make the gray everyday life of single ladies bright, colorful, magical. And for all this in life, you have to pay. That's why I charge a small fee for happy weeks and days. You have to admit, it's only fair. Our week was one of the happiest weeks of your life, wasn't it? I'm moving on. New adventures, new stories. And you? No offense. You're really special to me. I usually leave in silence, I don't leave notes. But I wanted to explain myself to you. Martha hurried on, staring at the piece of paper, the reading hard to fit in her head. Alex, who isn't even Alex, is a professional Alfonso, living off women, flitting through life like a careless moth. He plays different roles and enjoys it. Most likely we are talking about some kind of special mental disorder. But a normal person can't live like that. Strangest of all, after reading the note, Martha agreed with Alex. The guy was right. This week was really the brightest and happiest in her life. Martha decided to keep this story in the depths of her memory, sometimes to come back to it again, to feel those bright, positive emotions that Alex gave her. But it turned out differently. When Martha returned from vacation, she realized that she was expecting a child. I realized that it was Alex's child, a man who was probably not quite mentally healthy, but I decided to keep it because, first of all, I was tired of being all alone, and secondly, probably I still loved Alex. Or rather, the image that young man had created. At the due date, a wonderful, healthy, and strong boy was born. He had Alex's eyes. Martha had noticed that back in the hospital. The handsome, charming baby inherited other features of his father's appearance. He bore little resemblance to Martha. The woman prayed that the son's resemblance to Alexei would be limited to external features. Martha, knowing about the genes inherited by John, therefore paid special attention to the upbringing of her son. She developed responsibility, honesty, and kindness in him, and John seemed to grow up to be a wonderful guy. Martha anxiously searched for the traits of a reckless adventurer, as his father was, but did not find them. John faithfully did his homework, never skipped classes at school, and then at the university. When the boy grew up, Martha watched his relationships with girls with bated breath. But even here, John did not resemble Alex. Before Megan, the guy dated a former classmate. They were a couple for several years in a row. No torrid short-term affairs. When her son married Megan, Martha exhaled. It's okay. John has a beautiful wife, great kids, his own business. No, the son is nothing like the character of a careless Alfonso father. It was a success, but it turned out I'd been too early. Martha shook her head. Now I'm going to have to tell you the bitter and ugly truth about John. I kept silent while it was none of my business. Went through everything inside me. But now the welfare of my grandchildren is at stake. I can't let them be left with nothing. Megan realized what she was about to talk about. To make it easier for her mother-in-law, she spoke up. I know he's cheating on me. John has a young mistress. I've seen them together and even read the sweet couple's correspondence. Really? Martha's eyebrows rose in surprise. And why didn't you scandalize him? How did you even survive it? I'm just at a loss, Megan admitted. Having someone to talk to made her feel better. Yes, it was John's mother. But Megan sensed that she was completely on her side. I see. Martha nodded. Anybody would be confused. So you know about this, Catherine? Megan nodded, then asked. But how did you know about it? John told me, Martha said. He said he'd been unhappily married for a long time. That you, as his wife, didn't pay any attention to him. You'd lost yourself in the children and the house, become uninterested and indifferent. The usual male excuses. It was painful to realize that the only child in which so much invested in is capable of such a thing. Apparently, the genes still took their toll. Though not immediately, Megan could barely hold back her tears. But maybe he's right. I did have a lot to do with the kids in the house. Maybe John really did lack attention. I wish we had talked about it in time. He's wrong, Martha said flatly. There's more to it than that. Sometimes the feeling goes away. It happens, and it's normal, but this is different. John is lying to you, cheating on you, and that's the worst part. He and Catherine are going to leave you with nothing. You and the kids. How? Megan gasped. She was used to the idea of John cheating on her, and here was a new shock. It seemed to her that her husband adored children and would do anything to provide them with a happy future. And now this. Although these hints about preparing for divorce, this is their plan. It's sad. Martha shook her head. When I heard him, I wanted to give up the plan and my son right away. But then I decided to keep my emotions to myself. If I didn't agree, they'd think of something else. John felt like a happy man. He had achieved a lot in life, built a whole mini-empire, organized a network of plumbing stores. The man had a right to be proud of himself. His family life up to now, everything suited him: a beautiful wife, wonderful children, well-adjusted life. It was a kind of quest to get for the family funds, buy a new car, change the apartment to a large house. And then these tasks somehow ceased to fascinate and bring joy. It became too easy. John no longer needed money. They were enough for new acquisitions, and for traveling, and for children's education. The man suddenly got bored, and then just at this very moment, in his life appeared Catherine, young and energetic, loving adventures and adventures. She worked as a saleswoman in one of his stores. One evening, John stopped by the store to talk to the accountant, but the woman was no longer at work. Behind the counter, however, stood a new saleswoman, incredibly beautiful. She's openly flirting with the boss. But how can you resist? No, at first John resisted his feelings. His mother from childhood brought up in him responsibility, hammered into his head the true values of the family, so it was difficult for a man to make this step. But when it happened, John realized that all these years he had lived in the captivity of his own attitudes. With Catherine, John felt young and energetic again. She was as adventurous and capable of abnormal behavior as he was. Existence without this girl now seemed to John bland and boring. So it went on for several years. Feelings did not subside, on the contrary, flared up with renewed vigor. John was literally bewitched by his young, beautiful mistress. He did not want to part with her for a moment, but every or almost every evening he had to return to the boring Megan. The very atmosphere of the house, once warm and cozy, was weighing on John. He felt like he was in a prison. The lovers talked more and more about John needing to divorce Megan. It was a done deal. True, both of them did not want one thing: that half of all the property accumulated during the years of marriage passed into the ownership of the legal spouse. She wasn't working, was she? Catherine was indignant. She sat at home, cooking borscht, relaxing, watching soap operas while you worked. In justice, all property should belong to you and only you. That's true, John sighed. But the law is the law. Megan will be given half of the property acquired during the marriage. But isn't there a loophole in those laws? You're in a position to hire a good lawyer to figure something out. And one day there was a loophole. It was simple and complicated at the same time. It was suggested by a lawyer who was familiar with such issues. "I have already had such cases in practice," said a man in a stylish suit. "You need to sign over all the property to a person you trust. And your wife should trust him too. Maybe a close friend or relative. My clients explain this to spouses to preserve assets in case of business problems. Everyone has their own theory, and then you can initiate divorce proceedings. There is no property, there is nothing to divide, and the trusted person, after everything, just rewrites houses, apartments, cars on the already divorced spouse, that is, on you. That's it." John thought for a long time. After this conversation, he had only one candidate for the role of such a trustee: his mother. Megan would easily agree to sign over all the property to her. She trusts her mother-in-law. But how to go to her mother with such a request? She would have to confess everything to her, and yet there was no other way. John decided to have a serious conversation. He realized his mother would not be happy about the situation. But she's his mother, she will support her son and help him. It was a shame to give Megan half of what he earned. Especially since Megan did not work, lived a quiet and relaxed life. What right does she have to all this? Martha listened to her son in silence, not interrupting. As always, she looked unperturbed and somewhat detached. The only thing that betrayed the older woman's anxiety was her fingers, which tugged relentlessly at the long sleeve of her sweater. "Have you made up your mind?" Martha asked when her son had finished. Yes, he nodded. "Ooh. Don't you feel sorry for Megan?" "I've fallen out of love with her. She's clearly indifferent to me. What are we going to do? Spend the rest of our lives together? What about assets? She hasn't invested a dime in the house or anything else. So that's fair. I was the only one working. She provided for you," Martha reminded me. "And she raised your children. Thanks to Karina, you could think of nothing else but the development of the business. She always took care of the rest. And remember Megan at first, she helped you a lot. Doing those reports at night, doing those estimates. That's when you got a staff of accountants." "You're exaggerating, Mom. You're exaggerating what she did." "All right, and the children?" It was obvious that Marta was struggling to keep it together. "What about the children? Am I going to pay child support for them? That's how I'll help them. So you'll help me?" After a short silence, Martha nodded her head. John could see in her eyes that her mother didn't approve of what he was doing. Well, he hadn't expected anything else. The important thing was that she agreed. John signed over all the property to Martha. Megan did not suspect anything. She immediately believed in the fairy tale that John, in this way, just avoid unnecessary risks. Megan hadn't been paying much attention to anything lately. All her time and attention was devoted to her young daughter. Well, all the better. Catherine was as excited as a child. You bet, because everything was going so smoothly, without a hitch. It seemed to open up a happy, carefree future ahead. Catherine and John planned to celebrate their success with a trip to the sea. They had already chosen a resort, even argued a little about it. One day, when all the property was already rewritten to Martha, John dared to have a frank conversation with Megan. The man, of course, was worried. All the same, to inform the person with whom he lived so many years, such news, not very pleasant. But Megan took it all surprisingly calmly. Naive woman, apparently has not yet realized that she will not get anything in the divorce. She wouldn't find out until the courtroom, and even if she finds out sooner, there's nothing she can do about it. John officially moved into the apartment he'd rented for Catherine. Now it was just the two of them, waiting for the court hearing after which Megan would have to leave home. In the very apartment where they lived before John succeeded, on the street, the ex-wife and daughter will not stay. And the boys, they're already living in another city. Independent young men. You don't have to worry about them at all. And now, finally, the day has come. John and Catherine have waited so long for this date. Today, at last, it will be over. John will get freedom. A little later, will sign everything from his mother to himself, and the sweet couple will fly to the beach with white soft sand. Catherine decided to go to the meeting with her beloved. She wore an elegant suit, emphasizing the advantages of her luxurious figure, made light makeup, let her hair down. John once again admired the beautiful beloved. Yes, she looked like a supermodel from the cover of a magazine. In his youth, John had never dreamed of such girls, and here he was, a stunning beauty in love with him. In the conference room, John noticed Megan at once. She looked surprisingly calm and dignified. For some reason, Martha was sitting next to her, wearing the suit she had worn as an airport employee on the days when she needed luck. His mother's presence confused John. He wondered why she was here. She's sitting next to Megan. Come to support her sister-in-law. Odd, considering their plan. Catherine tensed at the sight of her future mother-in-law. She disliked Martha. She realized that the older woman was not happy that the young girl had broken up her son's tight-knit family. So what? What did her opinion matter? Absolutely none, she thought. Martha greeted her son and his companion with a nod of her head. Megan, on the other hand, said hello loud and friendly, even smiled. The hearing began. The judge read the divorce decree, determined the place of residence of the minor daughter with her mother, and announced the amount of alimony that must now be paid monthly on Vivian John. And then it came to the most important thing of all, property. Since you don't share any property, there is nothing to divide, the judge concluded. The wife's marital home remains hers. In general, that's not all. What about the gift? Martha spoke from her seat. As for your gift, it's not a subject for a court of law. What gift deed? John jumped up, his heart clenched with misgivings. Catherine, sitting next to him, smiled happily. She did not suspect anything yet. A deed of gift for all your family's property, which I made out to Megan, Martha replied, looking pointedly at her son, Megan, and the grandchildren. What did you think? I'm going to leave them on the street with nothing, so you can have a nice life while they all live in a cramped apartment. John's eyes blurred. Such a man did not expect such a mother. He looked at Catherine, beautiful face. The girl skewed. There was an evil grimace. She opened and closed her mouth in surprise. She tried to say something, but not a single word escaped her tongue. She even seemed to be out of breath. Megan looked calm and peaceful. The judge read out some more formalities regarding the divorce. Martha was whispering about something with her sister-in-law, and it was slowly dawning on John that it was over. Of course, Catherine would leave him now. She would not stay with him through the hard times. That's for sure. She would have to start all over again. All over again. Emma remembered very well how her father left the family, trying to take almost everything that could be taken out of the apartment. She then returned quite late from celebrating her friend's birthday and almost fell, tripping over a pile of equipment and things, for some reason piled at the threshold. The girl even thought that someone had gotten into the apartment and was about to jump out into the entrance. But she heard the voices of her parents coming from the large room, which served as both a bedroom and a hall for receiving cheerful companies on holidays. Hastily taking off her boots, hanging her jacket on a hanger and throwing her backpack on the floor, Emma went to find out what was happening. And I found a strange and terrible picture. The parents quarreled as much as never before and did not even pay attention to the daughter who looked into the room. Emma, instead of her adored father, seemed to suddenly see a completely stranger instead. Cruel, screaming, with a pulsating vein in his neck. It seemed that this angry stranger would right now begin to destroy everything in the apartment. But instead, he methodically walked around the room and collected things, without ceasing to swear with his wife. Why did you decide that I was suitable for the role of an idiot? When were you going to tell me the truth? Never. Why were you so sure that I wasn't going anywhere? I thought that I was a complete fool and even stopped hiding my adventures. That's great. Don't think that this will continue. If you file for alimony, you know I will challenge it. Let them do the examination. I now know that all these years I was raising a daughter who was not my own. Emma froze on the threshold, shocked by such strange news. But the girl's mother did not look confused or offended. If she had cried, claimed that a mistake had occurred, and offered to double-check everything, but no. The woman answered her husband no less aggressively. "Oh, Andrew, you made me laugh. He doesn't want to pay child support. Will you demand an examination? Who will you make worse off from this? How are you going to explain to Emma that she is no one to you now? Will your heart not yearn for her? Remember how great you play with her, go skiing, even go fishing in the winter and go in the summer. What? Will you forget all this? Will you throw it out of your head like garbage from a bucket? Good father." I instantly forgot my daughter. So the man furiously threw everything in his hands onto the floor and swung his hand to hit his wife, but resisted and shouted, "Nakin Yerzim. How can I still treat her if she is a clear reminder of your sin? You knew that I wouldn't forgive betrayal. Why then did you force me, although there was a risk that everything would be revealed, to raise someone else's child? Couldn't you wait for me? I went on long flights for the sake of my family. I tried to earn more money so that you wouldn't need anything. When Emma was born, I began to work even more. Why, with a child in the family, you need so much? But now I don't understand why I sometimes didn't sleep for days. It turns out that I didn't have a family. Only the wife is out for a walk and the child she took on the side. Andrew, well, forgive me, it was a random episode. A burst of passion, nothing more. I tried hundreds of times to explain everything to you, but I was afraid that you wouldn't understand. I'm so dread. The man even found the strength to laugh. You're interesting. In my opinion, I had the right to know the truth from the very beginning. Then it probably wouldn't hurt so much now. I quarreled with my mother for your sake. Although she seemed to feel your deceitful nature in her heart, Andrew turned away from Kate so that she would not see the tears in his eyes and noticed Emma frozen in the doorway. The man felt uneasy. He had considered this girl his daughter for so many years that, of course, it was impossible to divorce her overnight. Sorry, Emma, the man said and began to collect the things he threw away. And then, waving his hand, he sat down on the sofa. Elaine didn't know what to say. The girl solved the problem herself. Approaching the man, she sank down on the floor in front of him so that she could look into his eyes and said quiet, "For me, you will forever remain a real dad. So know that when you want to talk to me, I will always be glad." The man could not restrain himself, and in an impulse hugged the girl, whom he had considered his daughter for 14 years, and headed towards the door. Emma heard the head of the family rattling something in the corridor, but did not go out. In general, this situation seemed like some kind of strange, sticky nightmare to the girl. Only when the front door slammed did she dare to ask, "Mom, how come? Why did Dad decide that I'm not his own daughter?" Kate, who smelled faintly of booze, didn't lie. "Oh, but it's awkward to tell your own daughter this. But you seem to be an adult already, so listen, at least so you don't repeat my mistakes. I married Andrew as soon as I turned 18. He had already served in the army and got a job as a delivery driver. One day I brought some goods to the city, to the store where my mother, your grandmother, was in charge at the time, and he saw me. In general, I began to look after him. But both his mother and mine, of course, were against it. They thought that we were not a couple at all. My mother said that with a villager, I would die of boredom. So she declared that he only knows how to talk about the quality of manure, and it would be a shame to even go to the cinema with him, let alone to the theater. But you must remember your grandmother. You were already 10 years old when she left. Do you remember how she didn't mince words? Her grandmother, after whom she was named, was always, as they say, at the parade. But she could roll out a phrase in such a way that there was no wet spot left. Kate took a breath and continued to share a family secret with her daughter. The woman, the mother, who, like mine, also raised a child alone, did not stand on ceremony in her expressions. She called me a city reveler right to my face. She declared that she would not give her blessing for her son's marriage to a slacker. Well, who and when did young people listen to? We got married, of course. She went to the village. Here I settled in this city apartment. It seemed like we lived nothing. At first, at least, and then money became scarce. My mother refused to help financially. Like the kids themselves, since you already consider yourself such adults that you got married. Andrew's friends told him that cargo transportation was more profitable, and he began to travel. There really was more money. But I'm bored. I then decided to go to the alumni meeting and unwind with one boyfriend who had been courting me since school seemed to turn my head. It seems like he has started to catch up. I'm not saying that I was directly opposed. Well, of course, I had no reason to be proud of myself. It turns out that you really are not his daughter, but your real biological father, by the way, learned from me that you were born. But by this time, he was already getting ready to get married and had no intention of changing anything in his life. So I had to keep lying. His mother, as soon as she saw you tiny, began to insist that you were not their breed. At most, he came to visit several times and made her whole face look as if she had eaten a lemon without sugar, wincing so much that it was disgusting to look at. She never invited me to relax. My mother-in-law could not know for sure that I had cheated on her son, but she was convinced of it, and she didn't need proof. Andrew, I'm sure she was constantly blowing into her ears that you were not his daughter. Yes, apparently she planted doubts in his head, although it took many years. But Andrew has changed for me today, your father. That is, not really, but in general. Xenia began to make complaints to me out of the blue that I didn't take care of the house, that I was returning from work drunk. He began to reproach me for setting a bad example for his daughter, that is, for you. In general, I couldn't stand it in the heat of the moment. Blurted out everything that I had been keeping secret for a long time. Blurted out that you were not his daughter. So stupidly, with your own tongue, you destroyed the fragile balance. What, Emma? Are you going to blame me for not being able to save my family? The girl did not understand what to do. She was drawn to her father, and paradoxically, she also felt sorry for her mother. And it was also incredibly painful that the familiar world was collapsing. In Emma's class, there were many students from single-parent families. They seemed to be trying to pretend that the presence of both dad and mom together was indifferent to them. But the girl still caught the inadvertently manifested notes of envy. Emma was sincerely happy, considering her parents quite happy. Until this evening, her family seemed like a calm haven to her. And now it turns out that there was no idol, total pretense. There was nothing left of Emma's good mood with which she crossed the threshold of her house. It's an unclear, and therefore even more frightening, prospect loomed ahead. Before the court hearing, at which Emma was supposed to be asked which parent she wanted to stay with, Andrew approached her. He did not look the girl in the eyes and said, "Now, when I'm not traveling, I live with my mother in the village. It's cheaper and more convenient. I won't object to the payment of alimony, but you understand that I won't be able to take you in with me. Moreover, you are aware of the whole truth, and I'm afraid you won't find a common language with my mother. I raised you, but for her, you are a complete stranger. So ask the court to live with your mother." Emma flared up, and, without being embarrassed by anyone, shouted, "Man, fuck you with your alimony. And a crazy grandmother whom I don't even remember where to go. I don't need anything from you. I'll get by." Kate, who was talking about something a little further away with an acquaintance she had met by chance, jumped up to her daughter and almost ex-husband and took the enraged Emma away from Andrew. The girl, sobbing, asked, "Now let's live without his help. I don't want to see him anymore, since he decided to eliminate me from his life." The divorce procedure for Kate and Andrew did not take much time. The court made all the required rulings, and the former spouses began a new stage in their lives. It seems that there were no major changes in the routine because the head of the family was not at home for a long time. But the situation became somewhat nervous. Kate, like many women, after the fateful changes, got a new haircut and began to pay special attention to her appearance. Of course, Emma wanted her mother to be happy. In any case, Emma did not reproach her mother, and she reacted quite tolerantly to the news, which came less than a year after the final point in the family's unhappy history. "In general, daughter, they will come to visit us this evening. Freddie, this is my friend, and his son George. I have 2 requests for you. First, help me clean up. Secondly, I want you to make a good impression on our guests. So don't dress provocatively." With this hopelessly ruined Saturday, a continuous series of troubles began for Emma. Kate literally crumbled in front of the guests, offering to try either a salad or baked meat. The lordly manners of Freddie, who presented the owners of the apartment with 2 pitiful bouquets of 3 tulips each, looking as if they were at least 1,000,000 scarlet roses, infuriated Emma. His son George caused even greater antipathy. He was only a year older than Emma, and with some pride told everyone present that he did not intend to waste time studying at school, and after finishing the 9th grade he would apply to college. Freddie nodded contentedly, listening to his son, and Kate, who always told her daughter that she should definitely get a higher education, also approved of this decision, but at the same time asked worriedly, "Well done, George, but probably in college there is no deferment from the Army." The guy grinned, "So I don't need her. I have chronic flat feet. I'm like my dad." In the middle of the evening, Freddie proposed, and Emma was offended that her mother did not even consult her, but immediately agreed. Probably it would have been easier for Emma to accept the next changes if her mother and Freddie had not decided to settle in the bride's spacious apartment and rent out the groom's home. When the guests, to the girl's relief, left, Emma, clearing the table, asked her mother, "Why did your fiancé and son decide to live with us if they have their own apartment? This is my joy, to make room for the sake of strangers." Aunt Pate was indignant. "No one will crowd you. We will accommodate George in the walk-through room. Your nursery will remain yours, and my room will remain mine." Emma tried to explain her point of view. It still turns out to be some kind of hostel. In my opinion, this is wrong. I can't even walk in my own house without clothes in the heat. Pleasure is below par. If you are interested in my opinion, it would be ideal if this Freddie of yours invited you to live with him. And I can handle the housework here without any problems. Kate was adamant, and then confessed, "We will need money soon, so you will have to rent out the apartment. I'm expecting Freddie's baby." Emma understood that her mother was still quite a young 34-year-old woman, and this scenario was quite predictable. However, the prospect loomed not only of constantly seeing a stranger and an unattractive guy, but also of becoming a nanny. She completely destroyed all the joy that the parent had found her happiness. Freddie, unlike the one whom Emma had long considered her father, did not bother himself with work at all, and most often lay on the sofa. George, to the girl's great joy, did not flash before her eyes for very long. One day, he simply packed his things into a bag and, asking his father for money, "In general, I'm moving to live with a girl. Everything seems to be fine with her. Besides, her parents moved abroad and it takes me 3 minutes to walk from their house to college. Waddle. All. Don't be bored. Or send money. Kidding. I will come for financial support myself." Kate tried to be indignant, reminding her stepson that he had only recently turned 16 years old, but he grinned brazenly and said, "But you should be jumping for joy that I'm moving out, and not pretending to be a caring mother hen. Besides," the guy nodded at his stepmother's already noticeable belly, "you will soon have noise, screams, and the stench of a child here. Why the hell do I need such happiness?" Freddie did not scold him for his rather impudent approach to his stepmother, but took money out of his wallet and, handing it to his son, muttered kind, "That's it, come on, go, the philosopher has been found." He took the bill handed to him and, picking up his bag, left. Just before the year 2000, problem and possible computer equipment failures were seriously discussed on TV. Emma had a half-sister, and so New Year's Eve spent with friends became practically the last island of calm in the period after my parents' divorce. Emma had fun, sang songs, and desperately hoped that the gloomy forebodings would not come true. However, everything turned out even worse than one might have expected. More than 3 years from the moment the mother brought the bundle with her youngest daughter from the maternity hospital, her eldest got the worst of it. It was Emma who most often changed her sister's diapers, threw them in the laundry, hung up the laundry, and so on in an endless circle. Freddie laughed from the sofa, looking at his stepdaughter and turning to his wife. "Man, Kate, you're great. You made a fuss about giving birth when you were young. First she got a nanny and then a cradle. Even preparing for exams was not considered a valid reason for not doing some homework. Only once, when Emma's temperature rose above 39 degrees, was she mercifully allowed to undergo treatment. Ira now sided with Freddie in all disputes. With her tacit consent, the stepson could take something he liked from Emma's house or ask Emma for a sum of money even without a promise to give it back. And there was no question of Emma buying anything for herself without her own money. The mother-in-law generally treated the girl like an empty place or a servant, and when visiting, she never brought the girl a single apple. Although despite the fact that he lived separately, she carried early fruits and sweets in bags to her adult grandson and her own granddaughter. Freddie then picked up the gifts intended for George and took them to his girlfriend's apartment. Simple-minded Anne, who from infancy saw Emma next to her much more often than her mother, treated her sister with the gifts she had received. But the girl didn't have the conscience to eat the child. In such conditions, Emma considered entering a pedagogical school on a budget to be a real miracle and made every effort not to be expelled from there. However, this became increasingly difficult. Another morning in the family began with a scandal. Mom shouted that it was time to get up and take her daughter to kindergarten. The girl resisted sluggishly. "Mom, but I can't do it today. I don't have the strength." Asked Freddie to take his own daughter, by the way, at least once. "Yesterday, after everyone else, I washed the dishes again. Only at 4 am I printed the abstract. I have my second day today, so I can easily sleep longer and not trudge through the disgusting weather to this equally disgusting kindergarten." Emma also wanted to add that she actually didn't ask Anne's mother to give birth, but she bit her tongue just in time. It was not the girl's fault at all that the main concerns about her were dumped on her older sister. However, even without this phrase, a quarrel broke out. Kate screamed in unison with Freddie that she, Emma, was completely ungrateful and didn't remember any kindness at all. "By the way, it's me, you slacker, who feeds and sings." However, there was nothing unusual in these reproaches. Probably, if Emma had not been so tired, she would have remained silent, as happened most often. But everything just came together. Workload with studies, part-time work, household responsibilities, generously placed on her by the rest of the family, irritation from the invasion of a strange man's apartment, and lack of sleep formed an explosive mixture. The girl fell asleep from fatigue, as she was in her home sports suit, jumped up sharply and, standing in front of her stepfather, began to reprimand him for everything that had accumulated. "Something I don't see is that your highness is overworking. Your mother is carrying everything on herself, and it's getting to me too. I really love Anne, but Freddie, it's time for you to do something for your daughter." "Oh, drone, that's who you are." The girl instinctively dodged, noticing how her stepfather's palm was flying in her direction, deciding to slap her in the face. Walking past her mother and running out of the room, Emma found George in the corridor. Friends that the guy was just taking off his shoes and muttered in greeting, "Let me eat it. I haven't eaten since yesterday's lunch. She started a scandal with me out of the blue and didn't even let me go home. I've been staggering all night and my stomach is just cramping from hunger. Come on, get moving. March to the kitchen. By the way, what's the food today? It would be nice to have some soup. Do you have any candy for tea? If not, go to the store." Emma, already angry about the quarrel, did not stand on ceremony. "And what you brought with you is what you will eat." Ends of the hallway, where a new squabble threatened to flare up. Freddie has already come out. He asked his son, me, "Why did you show up without even warning?" "Where else should I go if you, my only relative, live here? In the gateway, perhaps to live. In short, you'll have to make room. Now I will live here too." Emma's mood was completely ruined. One could not even dream of going now and at least getting some more sleep or just relaxing. George will definitely start eating plates now, turn on the TV at full volume, laugh, and make belching sounds. The girl muttered. I'll go. I'll take Anne to kindergarten." Immediately grabbing a backpack with rags, Emma led her little sister to the kindergarten, answering the girl's numerous questions along the way. However, the girl thought in her mind, how will everything fit in the apartment now? Just in the walk-through room, which George seemed to have previously wanted to give away. Anne has settled down, but now she will have to free up the territory for her blood brother. It's somehow wrong to place a girl's bed next to her mother and stepfather. This means that she will have to make room because it is simply impossible to get into the college dormitory. With sadness, the girl thought about the man whom she had long considered her father. However, after his mother divorced him, Emma saw Andrew at most 5 times. And even then, somehow in a hurry while running, passing by, he handed her gifts and, without even really talking, moved. For more than a year now, he had not seen her at all. The last conversation on the phone was crumpled. As the girl understood, Andrew was trying to cope with a personal tragedy, loading himself with work beyond measure. Attempts to call him were unsuccessful, but there were no replies to the SMS sent. Probably, if Mom had kept quiet about the secret of her birth, everything would still be fine with them. Now the girl has to suffer for her mother's old sin. As expected, in the evening the furniture was rearranged in the apartment, and with Anne's bed there was even less free space in the already small girl's room. But there was no other choice. The girl flatly refused to be accommodated in the walk-through room. which prompted a contemptuous remark from George. "Oh, you'd think someone would look at you." However, the guy was clearly lying. Emma noticed that he did not miss the opportunity to look at her unhindered. Since George moved into the apartment, the situation has gotten even worse. When no one was looking, the guy made obscene proposals to his stepsister, although he later reduced them to jokes. He hit the girl with slashes and slaps in the area below her back and laughed impudently in her face, noticing the fear in Emma's eyes. The girl repeatedly complained to her mother, who promised to deal with her stepson, but the conversation did not have any positive effect. George didn't care about Kate at all and, rolling his eyes, imagined the whole situation in such a way that it was naughty, but Emma who was pestering him. And Freddie, who was advised by his stepdaughter to reason with his son, began to defend him. "And you turn your sirloin smaller in front of George, also for me, depicting holy innocence. There is generally no place to test on modern girls." Emma realized that there would be no help from her mother, much less from her arrogant husband. Sometimes George went somewhere for several days. Only then did Emma sigh relatively calmly. One summer morning, Anne was taken to kindergarten by her mother, who needed to leave the house early so her eldest daughter could sleep a little longer, gaining strength before the last exam. However, Emma was in vain to rejoice at such luck, because while she was taking a shower, George opened the door to the bathroom in the most unceremonious manner, tearing out the latch on one side. Smirking, George said to his stepsister, hiding behind a translucent curtain, "Hey, move over. Or should we start with me rubbing your back?" Grabbing the first bottle she came across from the shelf, the girl threw it at the impudent man. It's unlikely that this could have scared him off, but someone rang the doorbell of the apartment demandingly. George muttered that he had been interrupted at the most interesting point and trudged off to see who had come. Emma hurriedly put on her robe and ran into the room to get dressed, but the strength of the door did not inspire confidence in the girl. And quickly getting dressed, she took pepper spray out of her backpack, deciding to use it without any warning if George got in her way. Without even drying her hair, she began to make her way to the exit. And fortunately, she did not meet her stepbrother. Judging by the sound of the water, he was in the bathroom. The girl was furious. She was running out of patience. Of course, she could change the protection to a stronger one, but she understood that this would not solve the main problem. She is defenseless in front of George, who does whatever he pleases. The girl did not intend to become a victim, so she planned a serious conversation for the evening. Having passed the last difficult exam scheduled for that day, even better than could have been expected after the stress experienced in the morning, and thus closing the summer session, Emma was glad that at least this problem was behind her. As agreed, the girl followed her sister into the kindergarten, and on the way home she was thinking about how to start a conversation with all the inhabitants of the apartment. The girl didn't want her little sister to witness the scandal, but she could be sent to the nursery to watch cartoons. What child would refuse? Meanwhile, she will put before everyone the main question that George living in the apartment is in no way acceptable. After Anne rushed off to the nursery, Emma asked to stay in the kitchen for Freddie, who was about to go to Emma's favorite sofa in front of the TV. George clearly did not expect that Emma would dare to talk about his morning prank and immediately began to make excuses. "I didn't know that the bathroom was occupied." It was obvious that he was lying, and the girl blushed with indignation. Oh, what a dunno. Didn't the fact that the water was on and the bathroom door was closed from the inside tell you anything? Why are you lying? The girl sighed in order to calm down at least a little, keep an even tone of voice and not scare Anne with her scream, and she continued. "In general, George, I can't stay under the same roof with you. Nothing good will come of it. With Mom and Freddie, you still somehow play the role of a simpleton. But as soon as you and I are alone, how do you behave?" It was noticeable that George was nervous, but was trying to find an excuse. How serious you are. I just wanted to joke. Just think, beauty. Do you even look at yourself in the mirror? I won't have any reaction to your appearance. A liter of wine won't be enough to make you want to look at you. Emma was not affected by her stepbrother's ridicule, and she gave her mother an ultimatum. You can't live like this any longer. I am very concerned about George's behavior. Mom, in short, either you kick him out or I'm leaving. Betty had been silent before, but intervened in the conversation. No, so go away. Get down on all four sides. You provoke George yourself. As the saying goes, it is true that if the dog doesn't want to, then the dog won't jump up either. It wasn't enough for you to accuse him of committing any illegal actions. Come on, get lost. There is no point in throwing mud at my son here. Emma was offended not so much because of her stepfather's words, but because her mother didn't even think to protect her. Kate was silent. She generally acted as if she had already talked about this topic with Freddie for a long time and decided everything was not in favor of her daughter. Mom, why are you silent? What, you can't even say a word in defense of your daughter, whom your husband is now insulting? Or do you also think that I'm provoking? Or is the presence of pants in the house more important to you with what will happen to your daughter even with two? Anne is also in danger. You never know what will hit this George in the head. She is small, and he will generally be able to cope with her. Freddie got furious. You rubbish. Keep your filthy tongue shut. Once again, I hear such suspicions towards George, and you'll instantly fly out of the apartment. And from her stepfather's impudence. Emma was even confused for a few moments. She had no decent words. And then she, trying not to scream, asked, "Is it okay that this is my mother's apartment and I am registered here? How am I going to fly out of here? Maybe you and your youngest will liberate the territory. It's high time for George to join the army. But you made a fuss, somehow got him off. And now this slacker is groping me out of excess strength. So let him get out of here before I break his empty head. When will he pinch me again or dirty me with his eyes? Let this precious one go to his apartment, which is for rent, or, in the end, let him rent. Better yet, both drones, get out of here." Kate did not know how to extinguish the conflict that had broken out in the family and asked, "Let us all calm down, and tomorrow we will calmly decide everything." Emma was unpleasant about her mother's attitude, but she was so tired of arguing and fighting for her right to live in safety that she didn't even wash the dishes, as her stepfather tried to order, and went to bed. Emma had gloomy premonitions. Judging by my mother's behavior, she is not going to drive any of the men away. This means she will have to leave. Okay, at least the session is left behind. You can, as an option, ask to go to a children's camp somewhere, even if not as a counselor, as long as she doesn't stay here in her home apartment, where she no longer feels at ease. There was no sleep in either eye when she heard someone approach the room. From the creaking of the floors, the girl realized that the person on the other side of the door was trampling. Apparently, he listens to understand whether the girls are sleeping or not. It seems that the situation did not arouse any suspicion. The door handle slid down, and in the opening the girl made out the silhouette of George. He walked towards her bed and almost jumped when Emma's quiet voice rang out. "If you take another step in my direction, I'll wake up the whole house. You will explain what you are doing in the girl's bedroom." He also answered in a whisper, "It scared me. I'll think something." The stepbrother was approaching, and Emma, without hesitation, screamed. She screamed at the top of her lungs, as if freeing herself from accumulated irritation and anger. The girl no longer cared. She was not stopped by the fact that the awakened Anne and the neighbor downstairs, a not quite adequate bilious man, knocked on the radiator. Emma did not stop screaming even when her mother and stepfather appeared in the room. The girl fell silent only when Kate splashed a glass of water on her younger daughter's nightstand in her face. This did not calm the girl down, but made her cough from the liquid that got into her mouth. Anne came in crying. Kate reprimanded Emma about her selfishness and bad upbringing, but the girl didn't care. Under this terrible cacophony, Emma hastily collected her things. "I won't stay here for a second longer. I seriously doubt that George showed up here in the middle of the night to ask for forgiveness. In general, Mom, I wouldn't expect you to pay for your share in this apartment or completely remove this bastard from my field of vision." Freddie looked with clearly discernible anger first at George, then at his furious stepdaughter, and did not react at all to his daughter. Kate, clutching her head, went to get some medicine, reporting to nowhere. "Lord, what kind of disgusting thing is it to organize a material showdown in the middle of the night? I need to take a sedative." Emma sat down next to Anne, stroked her head, said goodbye, and passing by the kitchen, where her mother was sitting at the table, reminded her, "I'm waiting for a call as soon as possible. I'll come for the rest of the things later. I hope everything will be safe." The girl was shaking with anger, but she stubbornly walked to the station to go to the only person who could help her. In the waiting room, Emma opened a notebook for secrets, which it seems was given to her by her neighbor in either the 3rd or 4th grade, and I found the entry among the pages of the desired one. Andrew wrote this line a long time ago, when the girl still had what she thought was a strong, happy family, and said that this was his mother's name and her address. The man promised that one day they would all go to visit her to try to overcome past differences. The girl got her bearings and bought a ticket to the station closest to the one she needed. Judging by the information, we would have to walk about 4 kilometers, but this was not what confused Emma. She thought hard about what to say to Jane and how to introduce herself to her. Your son's ex-daughter, your ex-daughter-in-law's daughter, Andrew's friend, the one he considered his daughter for a long time. The girl looked through the options, but could not find the perfect one. But getting to the destination turned out to be as easy as shelling piers. And soon Emma was already standing at the fence with a sign attached to it with the desired address. The girl did not dare introduce herself to the woman in a tracksuit who was clearing the front garden of weeds. And apparently, it was Jane. And just ask, "Hello, can I see Andrew?" The girl did not even imagine that completely harmless phrases could produce such an effect. The woman threw herself on the ground and began to howl like a wounded animal. Emma hesitated only for a few seconds, and then, throwing her things, opened the gate and ran up to the woman. "No, Jane, get up. How can I help you?" The crying woman did not immediately begin to calm down, and only after a few minutes, Emma was able to lift her from the ground and bring her to a bench under a tree. Jane blew her nose noisily into a rag she took out of her pocket and ordered, "From home, bring me a mug of water and pills from the refrigerator." Emma ran into the house and, having quickly found all the necessary medicines, rushed to look for a mug when she noticed a photo of Andrew on the table with a black ribbon at an angle. The girl felt sad to the point of tears. She sniffled. Andrew was the only person whom the girl considered a father. And although due to Kate's fault, the relationship between the imaginary relatives was destroyed, Emma still missed him. She now understood what caused such a violent reaction from Jane, and was completely at a loss how to explain who she was and why she had come, so as not to torment the heart of the poor woman who had lost her son even more. If it weren't for the girl bringing Jane pills and water, and when she took the medicine, she asked, "Maybe we should call the doctors." Jane Ivanovna shook her head, and then wiped her eyes from tears and began to study the uninvited guest. The look in her eyes suddenly became prickly and angry. The woman painfully poked Emma in the stomach and began to accuse, "It's your fault that you and your mother are walking. They killed my son. Do you live happily ever after? Oh, you're a reptile. You weren't even embarrassed to come here to see me. Yes, if it weren't for your demon mother, you wouldn't have fooled my son. Now I know for sure he would be living with some worthy woman." I immediately told him, "As soon as I saw you a newborn, that Kate is rubbish and is someone else's child and is trying to tie him to herself." Didn't listen. And this is the result. He crashed his car, and it was as if he had never existed in the world. He didn't even leave me a granddaughter or grandson. They buried the damp earth, and that's all. There was Andrew. He is not there. Only the grave remains. Get out of my yard no matter what you came for. My eyes wouldn't see you. The woman, breathing heavily, rose from the bench and began to advance on the guest, showering her with choice abuse. Emma muttered an apology that Jane didn't seem to even hear, and ran out of the yard, picking up her things thrown by the fence. The girl decided to visit Andrew's last shelter. Still, she could not perceive him as a stranger. She saw where the cemetery was when she walked to the house, and it was not difficult to find the grave of the son of such a hostess who was so angry with her, a simple cross with a photograph and a plaque with 2 dates. That's all that's left of Andrew. Emma, as if all restrictions had been removed from her, began to tell everything that tormented her in front of the grave. Tears flowed down her cheeks, and she kept complaining. "Daddy, I don't know what to do at all. I need to look for housing because my heart feels that my mother is not going to exchange the apartment. I don't want to huddle there with these people. And it's just a pity. But not only can I help her, I can't help myself either." Of course, Emma did not expect that inspiration would descend on her in the graveyard and she would understand how to act further. But after talking out loud about my misadventures and sobbing, blissful emptiness set in. Having said goodbye, Emma came in from the side and, holding out her hand, stroked the photo of Andrew. "Goodbye, and don't be offended if I can't come for a long time." Emma wandered back. There were logs piled up near a fence near some house, and the girl decided to find out if there was any live-in work in the town next to the village. She took out her phone and became despondent. The smart device, the first assistant of a modern person, was completely discharged. Even without this trouble, my nerves were on edge. And although Emma thought she had no more tears left, she burst into tears again. The girl did not notice anything around, not even the buzzing of mosquitoes trying to sting unprotected parts of the body. Emma almost jumped when a mocking male voice was heard above her head. "Girl, have you decided to build a pond here? But this is no good. We specially stacked the logs here for wiretapping, but here you are silent about them. Get up and come with me." Emma raised her head, wiped away her tears, and looked at a handsome man of about 25 years old standing in front of her. The stranger extended his hand to her. "Well, what kind of tragedy happened?" Emma did not share the details with the man and blamed her tears on her dead phone. "If you have a charger, then this is not a problem. My house is behind you. There will be a free socket. Let's go too." The man extended his hand to the girl, but Emma did not dare trust the stranger. "Ted, he ate you." A woman walking down the street shouted. "Who is sitting under our fence?" "Ted is me, and this is my mother coming." Judging by the bags, the evening bus arrived and the driver and sister gave us gifts. "I'll run now, I'll meet my mother, but don't go anywhere. We'll solve the problem with your phone." Emma had nowhere to go. Without the information support of her smartphone, she felt too insecure and suddenly afraid that she might have forgotten the charger during her hasty preparations. The girl opened her bag and began to look for it. To my great joy, I had it with me. Emma exhaled. Now all that remains is to find a place with an outlet. She could try a local store, but she had no idea what hours they were open until, having taken the bags from his mother, walked first and, hugging the girl, asks, "Well, now aren't you afraid to go into the house? We won't be alone." Emma replied, "I'm not afraid, but it's probably not very convenient." "No. Come on. What's your name, by the way? Otherwise, my mother won't understand that I'm taking an unfamiliar girl into the house so easily." "Emma. Well, it's very nice. Take your things and follow me. You will meet your mother at the house. Otherwise, I see that you have already been bitten by mosquitoes." Ted put his bags on the floor in the kitchen and started charging his phone. "But it seems to be blinking. Now you have to wait a little, and then you can turn it on and use it." "Thank you." Emma began to thank, but didn't have time to finish. The mistress of the house appeared in the kitchen, breathing noisily. Looking carefully at the guest, she rested her hands on her wide sides and asked her son, "Ted, is this girl not one of ours? Explain who this is. Did you meet at our house or what?" "Mom, this is Emma." "Emma, this is my mother, Mary." The woman frowned. "I needed to see Andrew." Emma paused to control her emotions and continued, "Unfortunately, I was late." Mary turned to Ted. "No, this is not my own daughter. She complained at the bus stop. She says she came, gave me a heart attack and left somewhere, but it couldn't resist making an ironic remark. If my aunt had a heart attack, well, would she not go to the first aid station, but go to the bus stop? Are there any alternative methods of treatment practiced there?" Mary, as if not noticing the guest, answered her son. "Oh, Ted, you just need to be sarcastic." She wanted to pull this girl by her hair. She said that she regretted that she didn't give her mother a kick in the ass. When Andrew brought her to the house to meet her, the mother immediately guessed that her son would be unhappy with this woman. That's how it happened. But do you remember what kind of city he returned from a few years ago? They put it in a coffin, honestly. The women said that he brought almost nothing with him. He left everything to his wife and not his own daughter, this Emma. Betchins. They say that Kate cheated on him even in marriage. Bless you. Van went. "Mom, you know that I try not to listen to gossip." Mary waved her hand and turned to the girl to satisfy her Emma experience. "Where have you been?" "She sat here under our fence the whole time." "Why didn't you go straight to the station?" Emma replied. "I went to the churchyard. You may not believe it, but I really feel sorry for Dad. I never knew another father. It was he who wiped my tears. When I got bad grades at school, he gave me my first bouquet of flowers and carried me on his shoulders. I even braided my hair when my mother had no time. It's not easy to immediately lose such family relationships. I sat on the grave and didn't even notice how much time I spent there." Her heart trembled, but she asked, "Why did you stop at our house where I could sit down?" "I stopped there. I'm sorry I bothered you. Now the phone will charge a little, and I will leave." Ted smiled. "And where are you going to go at night?" "A young and beautiful girl is hardly worth taking risks." "Mom, let's make Emma sleep on the sofa in the summer kitchen. It's warm now and she won't freeze. I can take her tomorrow morning." Mary was indignant. "That is, you don't have time to go to your aunt and pick up the transmitter, and how to go for a ride with a girl. So for the sweet soul, Although, by the way, it's not dark yet. You can pick berries, peas, and strawberries today and radishes and onions tomorrow morning. It will be fresher. You will take everything to your aunt. Let him sell it. Now the first greens, the berries are expensive. The woman turned her gaze to Emma and demand. In general, while your phone is charging, let's go. Will you help me? I need to rest before I go on the road tomorrow morning. Although picking small berries was not the most common thing for Emma, she coped with the task quite quickly. Slowly but surely, the cups were filled with ripe berries. As Mary ordered, Emma did not fill them to the top and put them in a box with cells. When the 2 bushes were freed from their burden, Mary called to the girl, "Come." When Emma approached, the woman outlined a new area of work for her. "Here, look, the pea blades are neat and not all in a row. Oh, and I also need to give you a bed." Emma nodded. She herself wanted to at least somehow thank the people who decided to shelter her. The girl did not feel the strength to go somewhere right now. It was necessary to have at least a short respite after the earlier harvest had been harvested. Mary invited both her son and her guest to the table. Only at that moment, when the girl smelled potatoes stewed with meat, did she realize that all day she had been refreshed only by pastries and soda at the station. Trying not to look hungry, Emma started eating. However, she was prevented from completely relaxing by the attentive, searching glances that Ted threw at her. The man really liked the girl. Slender, modest, it was clear that she did not have a nasty character. Besides, went with his mother to the garden without any problems. And she didn't even express her dissatisfaction with a gesture. And this despite the fact that it was obvious. The girl was clearly a city girl, unaccustomed to fresh air. There he sits as if after tea, almost asleep. But the conversation that her mother has with her, asking about her life, supports her. Ted didn't listen much to the dialogue. But he even felt sorry for the guest who ended up being interrogated instead of dinner, and he decided to end the torment of the unfortunate woman. "Mom, we are leaving early tomorrow. The guest has already made her bed linen. Otherwise, he simply won't be able to wake up on time tomorrow." Emma, who was really very tired both physically and mentally, looked at the man with gratitude. And Ted realized that he wanted the girl to always look at him like that. "Nee. Listen, did you head further to your native land or what?" He liked her more and more every minute. In the morning, Ted drove Emma to the district center, and getting ready to park near his aunt's house, asked the girl, "Don't know. Still need to think. My way home is blocked. I'll probably look for a place in some children's institution. Of course, I don't have a diploma yet, but I do have my record book with me. Maybe someone would take pity on the student. I need a vacancy with accommodation." The girl shrugged. "Listen, how come I didn't think of it right away? Now let's go to my aunt's together. Maybe she will need an assistant for the summer season. She lives in the apartment alone." He'd slapped his forehead and say, "Well, why did you bring this girl here for me? By the way, I have a decent apartment. Your mother already called me and warned me that you might not come alone. And with this one, which our Andrew raised for so many years as his own." So Emma ended up in a small town 100 kilometers from her hometown with Aunt Ellen. The apartment was decorated in a minimalist style, and the girl did not feel very comfortable in it. After a short introduction, the hostess asked Emma to sit in the kitchen, and she and her nephew went into the back room and asked, "That's it, you won't be alone." The nephew was spared the need to tell the woman the situation. "No, Ted, I don't understand who I can't trust. After all, trade is such a thing. Moreover, this girl's mother and I have our own scores to settle. You were very little when Andrew brought this FIFA to the village to show, although before that he wanted to marry me, by the way. How can I live in the same apartment with the daughter of this impudent woman? This Emma has a rotten family. So nephew, I'm sorry," and grimace, "but it seems children are not responsible for the sins of their fathers. More precisely, in this case, mothers are not responsible. Emma looks quite adequate. So I think you won't regret it." I tried to convince his aunt. "Don't even try to persuade me. Do you want to help this girl? Give him money to go home and let him settle down somewhere in his big city. There are also higher salaries." And the hostess and her nephew entered the kitchen, and Helen said bluntly, "I'm sorry, but I have my own personal life, and your presence would be out of place. And I don't need helpers. As they say, I can handle everything myself." However, Ted did not want to part with the beautiful Emma, and he feverishly thought about how to get her phone number. Much to the man's surprise, the girl was not upset at all, but was even happy. "It's very good that it's not necessary. I was looking through advertisements on my phone for a special boarding house, which somewhere, judging by the map here in the area, a cleaner is needed. It's not a very prestigious profession, of course, but I won't give up. In addition, accommodation and meals are provided, just a fabulous offer. The only negative is that, as the smartphone suggested, there is no public transport to this boarding house, so I had to order a taxi. In general, a wild number appeared on the screen. I just ask you to lend me some money to get there. As soon as I receive my first salary, I will transfer it to you immediately. No. What if you suddenly come there, look, and don't like it? Let me take it to you. I'll wait to make sure everything is fine, and only then will I leave. Helen, who involuntarily heard this dialogue taking place in her kitchen, was not too surprised by her nephew. Ted has always been very empathetic, from early childhood. I remember that at the age of 6, he brought a girl from a neighboring street to his home and said that this was his fiancée who would live with him. He also had several girls at school. At least 3 girls cried for him, but he grew old and, after serving, returned to the village with his bride. She, however, could not live like this for long under the yoke of the Midge and left for her homeland without waiting for the wedding march. As far as Helen knew, Ted was not at all upset about the failed marriage. It seems that he even breathed a sigh of relief and continued to lead a completely unmonastic lifestyle. And now the woman noticed a familiar spark of excitement in her nephew's eyes. The hunter has already had his eye on his next victim. Perhaps this poor fellow should have been warned, but Helen chose not to interfere. First of all, Emma was clearly of age, based on what the woman knew. Secondly, she has her own scores to settle with this person's mother. Thirdly, Helen knew her nephew. If he wants to get a girl, then he will get her. So let them do whatever they want, just don't touch her. Ted gallantly opened the car door for Emma, and Helen, watching the couple from the window, realized that the naive-looking young lady would have practically no chance to resist. The woman's instincts and experience did not disappoint. Ted had really managed to win Emma over, although, of course, he had to try. Basically, the thoughts of the girl, who was hired for seasonal work in a boarding house, were occupied with the problem of housing. Emma called her mother to find out how she was going to solve the pressing housing issue, but Kate asked to give her more time. Almost every time she answered the same question. No, daughter, it's not that simple. We only have a 2-room apartment in a residential area of the city and not a mansion on the main street. If you arrange an exchange for 2 apartments, then nothing good will come of it. Mom, why did you decide to change our apartment? Think about the fact that this is your marriage home. If you decide to exchange it and then buy another apartment, then your hubby will be able to claim part of it if something happens. It seems to me that the easiest way is to move George into the apartment that his father rents out. From the silence that hung on the phone for a few seconds, Emma guessed that there was some problem that she didn't know about and asked directly, "Mother, just answer me honestly, what's wrong with your Freddie's apartment? Does he even have one? Or has he been lying to you all these years?" Ricker sighed and admitted. Freddie had an apartment, but he had to urgently sell it in order to save George from prison. It turned out that Helga threw him out of her home and life for a reason. Freddie didn't tell me everything in detail, but the story could not have ended well for George. It's good that the injured party agreed not to contact the police, and the matter was settled peacefully. In general, this is the situation, daughter. Emma constantly tried to convey to her mother the idea that a person who had to buy freedom at the price of an apartment could be dangerous. Mom, do you understand that you are putting yourself and Anne in danger? Obviously, this George didn't pick flowers from a flower bed or took change from other people's pockets. It turns out he committed a rather serious crime. And Daddy, work hard. Instead of allowing his son to go where he belonged, he sold the apartment and paid off fair retribution. Well, okay, Freddie is not afraid of his offspring. But why do you allow George to be with you, Anne, under the same roof? Let him work, rent an apartment for himself, preferably further away. Emma was not so much tired from the work, which, to be honest, was a lot, but from the constant persuasion. She couldn't convince her mother to change her mind and push her to block George's access to the apartment. The only outlet for the girl was communication with Dima. The man came to see her every weekend, and sometimes on weekdays. During meetings, he showered me with compliments and brought various sweets and natural village products. The fewer days remained until the end of the last shift, the more worried Emma became. Without even knowing what to say, the decisive factor was one of the conversations with Dima, who, hugging her tightly, whispered in her ear, "Oh, Emma, my Emma, she just bewitched me. How will I live without you? I don't even know. Let's transfer to correspondence and move in with me. I will be lost without you. I will wither away. I understand that you are all so lofty and Emma was silent, but she liked the idea of moving. She herself felt that Emma had fallen into this man who cared so much about her. Besides, if she accepts the invitation, she won't have to return to her mother's apartment and look at the disgusting faces of Freddie and his offspring. Of course, it will take longer to study in absentia, but it will be possible to live with Emma's loved one, even without formalizing the relationship. While the girl was thinking, Ted whispered, "Don't think so. I'm not just suggesting you come and live. I understand that this is probably important to you. Just a little before the wedding happens, you will come to me. That's all." Emma looked Ted in the eye to make sure he was serious, as if sensing a shadow of doubt, confirmed, "Yes, I propose to you to get married. You usually have to wait a month from the moment you submit your application until it is signed. But this means practically nothing. You will live as a wife from the very first day Emma crossed the threshold of the house. She was spinning in a whirlpool of happy worries. The mother did not feel joy that her son brought Emma home as a bride, hearing laughter from Ted's room. Lemon frowned with disgust and quietly whispered, "They are having fun." If only they were ashamed of it, they decided to have the wedding on seemingly neutral territory, near which Emma spent the summer. The bride, who already knew that she had become pregnant by Emma Ted, did not want a large celebration and was glad that her future mother-in-law supported her. Oh, but now it's no longer fashionable to gather the whole village. Yes, and that's correct. The money that would be wasted on food and drink would be better spent on something useful. The car needs to be replaced, the roof needs to be patched. And you should buy a bed that's not so squeaky. Mary couldn't resist mocking. As a result, Emma invited only her mother and Anne to sit in a modest cafe. Under no circumstances did she want to see Freddie and George at the table on a holiday. From the groom's side, only his mother came. Aunt Helen flatly refused to participate in the celebration. Both Ted, privy to the long history with Andrew, and the bride's mother understood why. Anne sat on her lap for almost the entire lunch. When, after modest gatherings, the bride's relatives and the newlyweds and their mother had to go in different directions, the girl even cried. Emma also began to cry. In general, she had difficulty controlling her emotions and nerves. After a month of living there, the restless Mary's nerves were stretched to the limit. The woman literally did not allow me to lie down and rest. All she had for Emma was to work in the garden and greenhouse, roll up jars with the harvest, cook and clean the house. Everything had to be done by the bride. He, of course, helped as much as possible. But Mary, noticing, for example, her son peeling onions for preparation, almost cursed him out of the kitchen. "What did you come up with? Do women's work, go out and do men's?" If life was not sweet for the unfortunate young woman in her mother's apartment, then here in general, she sometimes wanted to howl like a wolf. Mary stole almost everything. When Emma spoke about her pregnancy and that it was difficult for her to tolerate certain smells due to toxicosis, her mother-in-law went completely wild. Left alone with her daughter-in-law, Mary began to raise the young woman. "Don't pretend in front of me. Why wasn't I pregnant? You know, they used to give birth in the field and nothing happened. They were all strong." Emma didn't have the strength to argue or prove anything. She almost constantly wanted to sleep. From a cheerful and active beauty, she turned into an amorphous creature with bags under her eyes. Emma understood that the pregnancy was not proceeding at all the way her mother went with Anne, and she was scared. She once complained to Ted, "Irene from your paramedic midwife center told me that swelling is a variant of the norm. When I began to say that on the internet, it was advised to conduct an additional examination for such symptoms." She openly cursed me. "I'm afraid Irene is being too careless about what I tell her. My symptoms are not the best. Take me to the antenatal clinic, at least in the nearest city." Hearing this, Mary could not stand it. "Yes, our Irene has as much experience as you are. Since she said that you have a normal variant, that means it is so." "That's right. She sent you. The simulator." The lady spoke on our head. "If you don't trust Irene, go. The bus runs twice a day. You'll leave in the morning, come back in the evening, and Ted won't have to travel around, and the budget will remain the same. You didn't bring a penny into the house, but you're still trying to ride into heaven on our backs." Having shown concern in this way, the future grandmother went to one of her friends, and Emma, left alone with her husband, began to persuade. "Ted, please, let's take me to the regional center. I feel that no amount of dill can help my condition. Why take the risk? The man could, but the woman somewhere on the cheek and promised, "Okay, I'll think of something." However, in the morning, when Emma woke up, her husband was no longer there. The woman got dressed and looked out into the car yard. The husband was also not there, and Mary Vasilievna was busy in the front garden. "Good morning," greeted Emma's mother-in-law. "Do you happen to know when Ted will be back?" Else, without looking up from what she was doing, Mary answers. "By the evening, Helen will probably have some kind of incident at work." And he rushed there to help. It became so offensive that tears flowed from my eyes. Why didn't her husband wake her up? Although he knew that she needed to go to the regional center, she would get ready in an instant. More precisely, she had everything already prepared for attending the consultation. Having filled a bottle of water, Emma took her bag and, trying to calm down, headed to the gate. "Are you going far?" "I need to collect carrots. Otherwise, according to the forecast, there will be a ton of rain next week." The mother-in-law's voice came from behind the woman. "When you sit down at the table, you are in the first row, and how to help, you run from the yard." Emma turned around and, not holding back her tears, answered, "I need to go to the hospital, where Ted, by the way, could very well have dropped me off." "Or did you specifically dissuade him from leaving alone?" "And I was fiddling with carrots. Very thoughtful of you." Mary was angry. "Oh, that's how you spoke. Here you have warmed up the snake, you impudent freeloader." Emma did not listen to what other insults her mother-in-law would come up with and headed to the bus stop so as not to miss the bus. The woman managed to get a paid appointment with a doctor only around lunchtime. As Emma assumed, additional tests were ordered, which they also could not take from her for free. However, the fairly young doctor conducting the appointment advised me, "Of course, I have no right to force you to urgently run and get tested at a paid center. However, when I was in your place, that's exactly what I did. Now I have a 5-year-old son thanks to the timely diagnosis of the problem and correctly prescribed treatment. It's scary to think what would have happened if everything had been different." Emma thanked the doctor and, leaving the consultation building, called her husband. "Ted, I'm in the center now. Please, I'm coming. I may not have enough money because I still need to take paid tests." The doctor wasn't particularly frightening, but it seems there's no point in delaying it since I'm already here. That man did not consider it necessary to apologize for leaving in the morning without his wife, and was even indignant. "Do you know where I can get this money? Am I printing them, do you think?" Emma, hearing women's laughter and squeals in the background, as if someone was tickling someone, was so surprised that she even ignored her husband's rudeness. "Ted, your mom said that you went to help your aunt, and you were having fun somewhere. How do we understand this in general?" However, instead of an answer, beeps were heard from the phone. Upon further attempts to call Ted, the woman heard that the subscriber was unavailable. In the paid laboratory, a charming girl filling out documents asked if Emma had eaten, made a discount, and after drawing blood, she even poured hot tea and offered cookies. Emma, embarrassed, asked how much tea and cookies would cost, and the girl laughed merrily. "What are you talking about? Everything is free. There are vases of more candy. True, they are tiny but very tasty. Take it, don't be shy." Emma modestly took a few things, and having learned that the next day the results would already be sent to the specified email, thanked Emma's girl, who showed much more concern for her than her mother-in-law and husband. As soon as the woman came out into the air, Ted calls, "No, tell me where to go." "I am free." Emma gave the address, and soon she was driving with her husband towards his village. The tired woman did not want to cause a scandal, and as a gesture of goodwill, she offered him some candy. "Try me now in the laboratory," the girl from the reception treated me. The man, who was expecting a showdown, realized that the threat of a quarrel had passed and ate the sweet with pleasure. But Mary, as soon as Ted and Emma crossed the threshold of the house, began to throw thunder and lightning. Son, this is just a disgrace. Okay, you left to help Helen. It's a holy thing to never abandon a relative in trouble, but after you, this one also drove off to an unknown destination." Emma indignantly tried to defend herself. "Actually, I told you and Ted that I was going to the regional hospital. By the way, I care about your grandson's health. The doctor said that tests need to be done and that swelling like mine is not normal." And the elderly woman chuckles. "These doctors just want to extract more money from simpletons. And in general, it is still unknown whose child you are carrying. I probably slept with half the boarding house staff. And you want to send it to Ted. Do you think your mother pulled off such a trick? And everything will go smoothly for you." Ted, get her out of my sight, and immediately. Since you found her under the fence, let her go there. That's the place for your woman to walk. You will still find a good woman. And the sooner you remove this from your life, the better. Look, Andrew got confused with her mother. So what's the result? He lies quietly in the graveyard while Jane sheds tears. She is too soft and was unable to immediately return her son to her side. So I was left alone without support in my old age. I don't wish such a fate for you or myself. Emma's eyes darkened at such words from her mother-in-law, trying not to faint to the delight of her mother-in-law's gloating. The woman, slowly, leaning on the wall, began to move towards the bedroom. There were no tears, just pure fear caused by an unusual sensation. Her stomach was twisting somehow strangely, but Emma, with her feminine instinct, understood that it was not from hunger. Carefully, trying not to make sudden movements, she began to fold her. A few minutes later, Ted came into the room and began to persuade. Emma, why are you freaking out? Just think, Mom got excited. She doesn't really think so. Mom herself is now sitting in the kitchen, worried, drinking drops from her heart. Emma raised her head and looked at her husband. That's it, Ted. I've had enough of this family life. You know, when I had to run away from my home, I firmly promised myself that I would never tolerate insults. But for some reason, until today, I have repeatedly broken my vow. But that's not even the worst thing. I am terribly offended that you can never say a word in my defense. I should not have believed that I could become happy. As soon as Emma said these words, another painful spasm ran through her. In a dull voice, the woman ordered to get dressed. I feel bad, take me to the hospital. Mary, who as it turned out, was not sitting in the kitchen but was eavesdropping on the couple's conversation, butted at me. Why are you pushing my son around? He has just arrived and must take you somewhere again. I won't let you in. By God, I won't let you in. Emma, realizing that arguing with her mother-in-law could be fatal, was already dialing the emergency number to call an ambulance. The 45 minutes while the doctors were driving became the longest in the woman's life. Sometimes the pain would go away for a while, and then she would continue to pack her things. When my insides again curled into a tight spring, I moved to a computer chair, leaned back and tried, despite the desire to curl up sideways, to completely relax and breathe calmly and measuredly. Ted defied his mother and volunteered to accompany his wife to the hospital. Mary only managed to insist that her son ride not in his own car, but in an ambulance, waking up after anesthesia. Emma felt terrible thirst and dizziness. Vision gradually became clearer, but the woman, looking around her life, saw empty beds in the corners like gray shadows. Emma blinked hard and, opening her eyes, noted with satisfaction they had disappeared. Gradually, the sounds returned. The woman heard someone walking along the corridor. Somewhere nearby, an elevator was making noise. Considering all sorts of devices that came into view, the specific smell of medicines and detergents, Emma concluded that the assumption turned out to be correct. Soon, a woman in a medical uniform entered, softened her lips with wet cotton wool, and greedy. Welcome back. How are you feeling? Nothing. I'm just very dizzy, Emma answered hoarsely. But it's normal. Narcosis is the thing. What is your name? Do you remember? Emma. Wonderful name. Well, let's watch you here a little longer and then go to the room. You will have to stay under the supervision of a doctor for several days, and then home. Excuse me, please, but what about my child? Emma asked the most important question, but received a very evasive answer. I'm just an anesthesiologist. The doctor will tell you everything in detail, don't worry. Emma nodded, causing everything to blur before her eyes, and it was as if she had fallen into a viscous, unnatural dream. After waking up again, she felt much better, although perhaps I wanted to drink even more. Before the woman had time to press the call button, a nurse came for her with a gurney. Well, my dear, let's slowly come here like this, sideways, carefully. Now I'll take you to the ward. Emma was worried about the child. As soon as the doctor approached her and began asking questions about her well-being, the woman quietly asked, "How is my child?" Everything became clear from Emma's downcast eyes, as through the thickness of the water some terms reached her that she did not understand. At the end of the explanation, the doctor spoke words of consolation. Operation was successfully completed. You will certainly be able to become a mother after the recovery period, of course. Everyone, rest. In the evening, be sure to come to the treatment room for an injection. The doctor left, and overcoming the urge to scream, Emma noticed her bag. Reaching out her hand, The woman took out the phone and dialed her husband's number. Ted, listen to me and don't worry. Collect all my things and bring them to me at the hospital when I am discharged. I will inform you about the date and time later. Let's stop by, file for divorce, and you can be completely free. The man tried to say something, but Emma did not listen to him. The woman now considered escaping from her home, transferring to correspondence education, and insulting her mother-in-law to be completely insignificant events compared to loss of a child. Now Emma has decided to return to the apartment where Freddie and his son have settled and kicked them out. Whether mom likes it or not, they didn't want it in a good way, so we'll be in a right way. We still need to find out what crime George committed in order to expose this bastard, but this is after my head stopped spinning so hellishly. Instead of a few days in the hospital, she had to stay for a week, but Emma had time to think about everything. She rejected calls from her mother-in-law without accepting them. And when Mary tried to talk to her daughter-in-law from her son's phone, she cut off her lamentations. You know what? Go under the fence yourself. And don't call me anymore. Berta did everything Emma asked and didn't even try to talk her out of divorce. Only when he dropped the woman off near the station, he asked, Emma, don't be angry with me and Mom. She didn't want this to happen. This is all a fatal accident. The woman didn't answer and didn't even slam the car door, although she really wanted to. Emma did not warn her mother about her return. And upon entering, I was surprised that there was no one in the apartment. On the one hand, this was very pleasing, but on the other, it was already almost 11 p.m., and Anne definitely had to be at home with someone. There was relative order in the bedroom that Emma shared with her younger sister, considering that there is a little girl living there. But in the other rooms, the woman noticed traces that looked like hasty preparations. Emma headed to the kitchen and automatically looked into the refrigerator. I was amazed that it was almost empty, so I put the kettle on. And then Mom and Anne entered the apartment. Oh, daughter. Kate was delighted. I'm so glad to see you, and grabbed her older sister by the legs and began to persuade her. Don't leave anymore. Emma crouched down to hug the girl and began to calm her down. Everything is fine. I won't go anywhere else. Later, when Emma read a book to her sister and the girl fell asleep, Kate apologized to her daughter. May forgive me for everything. I'm sorry, you turned out to be right. Freddie and George got into bad business. Now they are in prison. An old crime committed by George was also revealed. The two women sat in the kitchen for a long time, shedding tears into their tea. And then Emma suggested, Mom, let's sell this apartment and move somewhere far away. There are too many unpleasant memories here. Kate agreed. Soon, the mother and two daughters settled in a city 300 kilometers from their homeland. Emma transferred to a local university. I also met a nice single neighbor at the entrance. She no longer believed in the lightning-fast Emma and agreed to marry Pablo only a few years later. Kate, who, having married Freddie, ruined the lives of many close people, completely devoted herself to caring for Milana and the twins born to Emma and her husband.